always say we're not here on time.
You are early.
That's right, that's what I'm saying.
Boy, that would be a great picture. Everybody,
It is part of the original City Hall redesign. Yeah. How long ago was that? When it started? That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Do we need to pass these? Everyone have one of these already?
Yeah, I already put them out.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Whatever gets the job done, it's a really good addition.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the agenda for tonight, but keep on with your dinners. So anyway, what I'd like to do is start off with introductions from staff. I know we have a couple new commissioners, Robert and Daniel, and may not have met all the staff, so we're gonna start with introductions, and then Chair Kumont, wanted you guys to go ahead and do similar? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I was thinking that it would be good to have some new faces and just to kind of reintroduce ourselves to staff so they know maybe just like a quick 2-sentence who you are, how long you've been on the commission. One quick question, do we need to do the call to order, roll call, like to start the meeting, adopt the agenda? It's on the,
Yeah.
okay.
Why don't we do
So
that
we'll go
formally,
ahead and
just in
call
case? Sure.
the Wednesday, March 26, 2025 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Mr. Trainer, will you call the roll? Or can we just all say we're here? Or you can read our name
I'll
tags?
do a roll call real quick.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Polinsky?
Here.
Mr. Kravinsky? Here. Mr. Duncan? Here. Ms. Friedlander?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Chair Comont?
I'm here.
Thank you, we have quorum. Yeah. We figured it out.
On opposite sides of the dais. All right, and do we have a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight?
Move to adopt the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
I move we offer a box lunch to Gene Gresco.
yeah. We've got 2 extras here, Mr. Gresco. Did you already eat?
I offered him water earlier, he didn't want that, so,
Okay.
but it's still available.
Change your mind, we got extra.
All right.
Okay, great.
All right, I'm gonna ask staff to introduce themselves and say a little something, title and a little something about them. We'll start with Jack.
Okay. Jack Trainer, senior planner, been to the city for 3 years now. I've worked in, I guess, current planning, future planning, and zoning modernization most recently. And I just want to plug a reminder that this meeting is being recorded, so please do use the microphones in front of you when you speak. Thanks.
Kurt Lawrence, environmental planner. I've been with the city since January of 2024, so just a little bit over a year now. I've been working on the city's Community Energy Action Plan, which has been very interesting, and I'm passionate about trying to get the city to lower its greenhouse gas emissions on the way to net zero by 2050.
Hi, I'm Carrie O'Nino, Principal Planner, working mostly in transportation, and I started as an intern with the city in 2015.
Hi, I'm Emily Bazemore. I am an interim principal planner for comprehensive planning. I've been with the city for almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years in July. And I mostly work with long-range planning, comprehensive planning, planning studies, and things in that realm.
Hi, I'm Laura Arsenault. Let's see what I am today. Today, I'm a deputy zoning administrator and principal planner. I just worked with you all last week to get the Quinn site plan through, so good to see you all again. I just recently took on an interim deputy director for long-range planning and working with Emily on that role. So I'm excited to work on that shortly. Thank you.
All right, then Gary Fuller, I'm the interim planning director, normally the deputy planning director for current planning and development. So,
Excellent, thank you. So I guess we can go, I can go first if y'all want me to, or do you want to start it off? Okay, I'm Andrea Comont. In my first year as chair of the commission. This is my 5th year on the commission, and before that, I was on the CACT. I think I started in 2014, maybe. I put in a traffic calming request for my street, and Paul convinced me to join the commission. So here I am 10 years later, still engaging with you all as second family in some ways. So thank you for all the hard work you do. And I grew up here in the city, fun fact, so I've lived here for most of my life, and I'm raising my own family here.
Tim Stevens, I think I joined the commission in 2017. So I think it's when cottage housing was just getting started. So anyway, just good to see all the staff here tonight. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Brent Krasner. I joined the commission the same time as Tim. We were appointed at the same time. We were appointed in the fall of 16. We started January 17. That's right, so 8 years, which is crazy that it's been 8 years. Before that, I was on the BZA for, I think, 1 term or something like that. And as folks know, I'm a planner as well. But my day job, as Laura knows, is a lot of zoning stuff. So I really enjoy being on the commission to kind of flex the other parts of the planning brain, which I, worked with, previously in other, parts of the country before I wound up in Virginia. And I've lived in the city since 2011.
I am Sharon Friedlander, and I've been on the Planning Commission for the last a little over 2 years. This is my first advance because I missed the first one, and the second one my daughter was sick. So I'm excited to be a part of this planning process for the first time. But before I was on the Planning Commission, I was also on the Architectural Advisory Board for about 10 years. So right about when we moved here, I joined the AAB. My experience is also I'm a licensed architect as well as a general contractor. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, excuse me. I'm Phil Duncan. I've been on the Planning Commission for coming on a year now here. Before that, I was a serial civic activist, city council for 11 years, Transportation Committee in the early days when Gary was just barely a child. Absolutely. And the Economic Development Authority for a stretch in the early aughts.
Bob Kravinsky, 30-year resident of the city. Before this, I've been on the Planning Commission, I think, since the beginning of the year, and before this, I was on the Housing Commission for about a year. My kids my adult kids went K through 12 through the system here, and my wife teaches at Mount Daniel, so pretty tied to the city. I'm looking forward to a good discussion tonight.
My name's Danny Polinsky. Nice to meet everyone. We moved to the city in 2017 in the area where the cottages went up. So that was also our beginning of this process. We live behind Founders Row 2 and joined the Architectural Advisory Board about 3 years ago. Joined the Planning Commission same time as Bob did, about a couple months ago. I'm really just interested in got really involved in Founders Row 2 and Founders Row, and got interested in everything else and just kept going from there. So that's how I ended up here.
All right, so we'll move to the agenda items. So first item was introduction, and we've started that in terms of the Planning Commission and the staff. And then we also wanted to talk about just kind of the agenda and the objectives for tonight. So the first 2 items will include comprehensive plan update. Emily Bazemore will present that, and you have a background memo in your package, and we've provided you with the entire package knowing you didn't have computers set up, so all the material that you got online, and I apologize for a couple rounds of it, but I was sick with a virus on antibiotics for the last 5 days, and I'm much better now, but I was a little behind, and so anyway, that was the kind of 3 tiers of material coming to you, so I apologize for the lateness of that. But anyway, so I think the background stuff should serve us well tonight. So the first item was to talk about comprehensive planning that the Planning Commission had asked for. Second item was to get an update on the cottages and where we are on that, and they were approved in 2017 by ordinance, and then there was a post update on that in 2020. So we're prepared to talk about that this evening. And then the Planning Commission wanted, thirdly, to come up with some ideas and projects for the future and FY '26, what you would like to see, and then we can communicate that with the annual report to the council to build it into their work plan. I spoke with them today, and once the council elections are done in November, they would target January to do their next work plan, which would be 26, 27. Right now, we're in the 24, 25 work plan. This represents where we are today, as of today, with the projects. This is different than what you saw in the fall that Paul presented to you in November. And so we'll give you a little background on the process and input that goes into this very briefly as the third item for tonight. And then from there, we can go into talking about the ideas and projects that you guys are interested in. The staff will remain throughout the evening, throughout the whole Planning Commission meeting. So they'll be available to talk about at the end any projects or ideas you have. And we have all the expertise here. And so we'd be happy to discuss those with you and work through those together. Then we plan to, I'll just show it right now in advance. At the end, when we're talking about the projects that you're looking to do in the future to inform both the planning division's work plan as well as through the council, we would look for the items within these categories: current planning, long-range transportation, environmental, zoning. And so then, we would make a list, and then we would prioritize them as a group tonight. And then we would type those up and run those by the commission and the chair as part of your annual report. That would then go to the council, and that will be in May. That'll be the transmission in May. So that's the agenda for tonight. So we'll go ahead and start off with the first item, the comprehensive planning. Emily?
All right, thank you, Gary. Good evening, Planning Commission. So tonight I'm going to be presenting on the comprehensive plan status. This presentation goes hand in hand with the comprehensive plan status memo that was distributed to you all. I prepared it back in 2023 and have updated it since for 2025. So that's the most recent updated memo that you all received. Next slide, please. All right, so a little introduction to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a long-range plan that has a planning horizon of about 20 to 25 years into the future. The plan guides investment and development in the city. You can think of it as a blueprint for community development. The comprehensive plan is used by those in local government, from governing bodies such as the City Council to boards such as the Planning Commission and city staff. It is also used by developers, business owners, residents, and other stakeholders in our community. All CIP projects and new land development projects in the City of Falls Church are evaluated for consistency with the comprehensive plan. The plan includes an overarching vision for the city and guidance for different topics like land use, economic development, community character, natural resources, parks and recreation, transportation, housing, and even historic preservation. You're able to access the comprehensive plan digitally through the city's online planning library, and we've included the link right here. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So the Code of Virginia requires, or in Virginia, state law requires all local governments to prepare and adopt a comprehensive plan. While having a plan is required, the content of the plan is not regulatory. Rather, it is used as a decision-making guide for changes to the natural and the built environment to ensure development is both coordinated and harmonious. The plan is used as a basis for regulatory tools such as the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance. Article 3 of the Code of Virginia outlines the comprehensive plan. The section noted here states the following. At least once every 5 years, the comprehensive plan shall be reviewed by the local planning commission to determine whether it is advisable to amend the plan. So every 5 years, we want to take a look at different chapters and see if they need to be updated. Next slide, please. All right. So the Code of Virginia and the Planning Commission's role here. So the local planning commission is noted in this section right here with the following authority. It shall prepare and recommend a comprehensive plan for the physical development of the territory within its jurisdiction, and every governing body shall adopt a comprehensive plan for the territory under its jurisdiction. While we're looking at the state code, I also want to note that section 17.04 of the city charter also outlines the planning commission's role in comprehensive planning, noting that it is the duty of the Planning Commission to make and adopt a master plan. Next slide, please. All right, so here's the structure of our comprehensive plan. This slide focuses on the different chapters in numerical order. So you can see it begins with our introduction chapter, which also includes the vision for 2040. It moves on to chapter 2, which is our demographics chapter, which we actually just updated last year, people, housing, and jobs. Chapter 3 is our community character, appearance, and design chapter, kind of our urban design chapter. Chapter 4 is our land use and economic development chapter. Chapter 5 is environment for everyone. Chapter 6 is parks for people. Chapter 7 is mobility for all modes. Chapter 8, we are actually updating right now, so this update is underway. It's the community facilities, public utilities, and government services chapter. Chapter 9 is historic preservation, followed by Chapter 10, which is our housing chapter, housing a complete community. Next slide, please. So here you can see the different chapters in chronological order. So you'll see a set of 4 different chapters at the top that were all updated back in 2005. Again, one of which is the community facilities, public utilities, and government services chapter. We are working on updating that right now. But the historic preservation chapter, the land use and economic development chapter, and the community character, appearance, and design chapter were all updated over 20 years ago now. Our more recent updates were mobility for all modes back in 2014, still about 10 years ago, parks for the people, Falls Church 2040 introduction and vision chapter, and then housing a complete community was updated in 2019, environment for everyone in 2020, and people, housing, and jobs more recently in 2024. Next slide, please. Here we have our comprehensive plan addendums. We've done a few recently. You'll see them noted here. So beginning with chapter 3, we have the Enriching Falls Church public art policy. It's our public art section of the comprehensive plan. You can think of these addendums as like mini chapters to a larger chapter. We also have the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District, which was also adopted in 2024 as part of the community character, appearance, and design chapter. Underneath chapter 4, which is land use and economic development, we have our revitalization areas, small area plans, and urban development areas section, which was adopted in 2016. Chapter 7, very recently, we adopted our bicycle master plan. Carrie's team led that. That was updated actually in 2025 is when it was adopted. And then chapter 10, we have housing a complete community. Right now, HHS is working on the affordable living policy. Planning is actually acting as support for that addendum. So that's underway. That will be an adopted chapter, hopefully, or addendum in 2025. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to give a little look at kind of where we're at with the chapter 8 update, since that's what the team is working on right now. Again, this is our utilities, public services, and community facilities chapter. So we kicked off with the Planning Commission back in June of 2024. We also visited the Public Utilities Commission in July of 2024. And then we had our council kickoff work session in August of 2024. We will be visiting all 3 groups again for another work session to present a full draft, hopefully in July of 2025. We do have that date marked tentative as it's over the summer. So we're aiming for July of 2025 right now. Boards and commissions review and public engagement, we're targeting September and October of 2025. And then final action with Planning Commission, Public Utilities Commission, and City Council in December of 2025. Next slide, please. All right. So what have we been up to relative to the City Council strategic priorities for calendar years 2024 and 2025? So you'll see different projects that were included related to comprehensive planning in the strategic priorities document with the various City Council projects. So we have the Bike Master Plan. Again, that was adopted in 2025. We're working on the affordable living policy with HHS right now, also targeting an adoption in 2025, and Chapter 8 update, also targeting an adoption in 2025. So we've been working on a lot. Next slide, please. Alrighty. So now we're going to take a look at the comprehensive plan and kind of where it fits into the planning division work plan. So in our draft work plan, we had the Chapter 8 update noted from January to June of 2025. That's been underway. We also have it noted from July to December of 2025 because we expect to have it adopted around the end of the year. From January to June of 2025, we also had the affordable living policy, and that we have noted as adoption anticipated for June of 2025. So that leaves that second half from July to December. It leaves us some time to begin an industry scan for our next chapter update. So here I had Chapter 1, which is the Introduction and Vision chapter, or Chapter 3, which is the Community Character, Appearance, and Design chapter, as these were previously noted on the draft planning division work plan. Next slide, please. All right, so when we're thinking about priority chapter updates, just thinking back to that chronological list of chapters and just noting that, again, there are 4 that were updated 20 years ago in 2005. So we're working on one right now that's scheduled to be complete this year. So we want to start thinking about some other chapters that we could update from 2005. So again, that's Chapter 3, Community Character, Appearance, and Design. Chapter 4, Land Use and Economic Development. And Chapter 9, Historic Preservation. I do kind of want to hover on this slide for a bit because the Virginia Tech report was also distributed to you all for review. So back in 2022, Virginia Tech graduate student group looked at our Chapter 4, Land Use and Economic Development, and provided some recommendations for the time when we look to update that chapter. So I think that will be a good guiding framework for when we think about updating that chapter. They provided a lot of good feedback. And then I also just want to highlight that, historic preservation and then Chapter 3, Community Character, Appearance, and Design, those are 2 that could maybe even be updated together so we can think creatively about picking up 2 at a time versus 1. Next slide, please. All right, well, that's all from me. I'm looking forward to our Q&A about the comp plan. Thank you all for having me tonight.
Wrong time to take a bite. Thank you so much, Ms. Bazemore. That was great. I'll open it up to my commission members, maybe somebody else who's not chewing. I have questions, but if you all have any questions right off the bat.
Really quick, just want to hop in. I did mean to note that we will be discussing priorities later in the event, so we can also talk about priority chapters then as well.
Okay. Well, I have a few quick questions, and maybe some of these are dumb questions, but I don't believe that we are reviewing these every 5 years, the full plan or each chapter. So how do we address that as a commission? If that is sort of our duty to do, I mean, is it how do you recommend that we deal with that?
Yeah, so I think our priority right now is looking at those 2005 chapters. The city, the president has been taking a chapter or 2 at a time instead of taking a look at the whole plan in its entirety. That's kind of what we've done in the past, and we've updated chapters at a time in that way.
Yeah, I know it's a huge lift for staff to do these. There's a lot of community engagement, which is a good thing, but it takes a lot of time. So I agree, obviously with the focusing on those really 20-year-old chapters at this point. I'm curious about the process that you all use. I know you have the industry scan and you kind of bring that to us, and that's an opportunity where we can kind of see, here's examples of what other communities are including, the elements of that other communities are including in their comprehensive plan chapters like this one. So I guess I'm wondering, I feel like we go from that to kind of like more fully baked chapter. So are there opportunities, like, I don't know what your process looks like for pulling these together. Are there opportunities along the way where you could bring it to us to kind of like get feedback on where you are so far in the process?
Yeah, so we've actually done that for our last small area plan with the East End plan, and that could be a model for our next comp plan update. Depending on which one, I think it could work for any. Just taking a look at different sections and bringing it to the Planning Commission for a quick review and feedback.
I think that would be helpful, just because then, we can kind of like make those, if there are tweaks in a direction, we can make those along the way rather than going down one particular path. So that would be one question and request. I know that Mr. Stoddard, before he left, had recommended that we take another look at our vision chapter, which is from 2017. It's kind of crazy to think that Mobility for All Modes is from 2014. I think that was the year I joined the Transportation Commission. It's over 10 years ago now. So a lot has changed even on that front. I feel like we're in a very different place. And it may be the same is true for the vision chapter. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know these 2005 chapters are probably more pressing, but the vision chapter can kind of maybe set some of our community vision that would help inform the approach that we're taking to these chapters.
Yeah, of course. I agree with that. I think it's a good time to take a look at the vision. The city has changed since we drafted that vision back in 2017. I also think that chapter could be coupled with another chapter. So we could probably take on two, but I also realize that the vision chapter is going to be a lot of community engagement. There will be a lot of interacting with the community, getting their feedback, envisioning. So just looking to, think about what timing would look like, what drafting would look like. It could be coupled with another one, or we could keep it on its own. And I think, it's nearing 10 years for that one too. So I agree with taking a look at that one.
Okay. And then of these three chapters, I mean, do you all as staff have a recommendation on which one we might want to pursue first? Or are you really looking to hear that from us?
It would be great to hear that from you all. I know everyone has their different interests. All of these are very interesting chapters. So hoping to maybe get some insight from you all as you talk about priorities.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Any thoughts, feedback, questions from this group? Mr. Kravinsky.
Thanks for this great presentation. So with regard to the land use and economic development chapter, I've read I think there was a Virginia Tech report. One of the things that they suggested was to decouple land use and economic development, and that made a lot of sense to me. I mean, quite frankly, when you pull those two together, it focuses the chapter on the commercial districts, right? Whereas there's an awful lot of other land use issues that we might want to address. What's your thinking on that recommendation?
Yeah, no, it's a great recommendation from Virginia Tech in that report that they drafted up for us. The chapter is significant in length right now. So I think if we could maybe take an approach, like a more high-level approach, that would be great, and still include economic development. But like you said, right now it's land use and economic development. It could be a smaller section of the land use chapter.
Or could it be a separate chapter?
Haven't thought about dividing it up, but that could also be a possibility. I do think it's a larger discussion of like what you'd want to include in each. But that's a great point that could result in another chapter.
Yeah, it seems like there are two fairly distinct issues. I mean, they're obviously connected with regard to our commercial corridors, but they're not necessarily connected with regard to our neighborhoods. So I think it might not be a bad idea to just decouple them and maybe make them a separate chapter.
Yeah, and just want to highlight too that the small area plans provide like specifics on economic development for the different POAs, and there is an addendum to Chapter 4, which covers the revitalization areas and whatnot in the city. So each of those small area plans have an economic development chapter within them with specific guidance for those areas.
Great. And so the other recommendation that I would make would be that land use chapter might be a next good chapter to tackle. I had a email exchange when I was on housing with Mr. Stoddard, and his perspective was, based on council's strategic priorities, any of the land use and economic development, housing, or transportation would be good candidates for the next updates. And obviously, the housing is dependent at this point on, you want to complete the affordable living policy first, and then you tackle the chapter. That makes a lot of sense. So I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but I think the land use chapter would be a pretty useful next chapter, and obviously it was 2005.
Any other thoughts? You have your mic on?
Yeah, I mean, the land use chapter, as comp plans go, is usually like one of the fundamental core chapters in a comp plan. It's something that's kind of like the nuts and bolts, and that's important to get that right and have that up to date. So it is actually interesting that it's been 20 years since we've done that. I think there are reasons for that. I mean, I moved to the city coincidentally at the same time, Jim came to the city, or maybe like months after that. And so obviously the small area plan framework was like, I think one of the most, significant things that, Jim brought. And the legacy of that, I think, will live on for a long time. But although, to that point, I was always curious about how, if Paul and Jim ever spoke about, how they saw the small area plans working with the core, chapters. Is there anywhere that explains that? I think for a lot of folks, they don't understand, how those work together. I mean, they're sort of they're part of the same, sort of overarching kind of planning framework. But, I don't know if anywhere it sort of explains that. I think sometimes people conflate the small area plans with the chapters, and so I don't know if staff ever has talked about that, or if Jim and Paul ever, talked about how they saw that working. Because I think to some degree the small area plans have taken a little bit of precedence over the chapters. People really dig into those, and to some degree, not that the others aren't as important, but I feel like for example, the land use plan is 20 years old, the land use chapter, which is unusual for a community, regardless of its size, to see that. So that's just like more of a question than a comment, but just kind of an observation. I wonder if staff has ever talked about that, or what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, when we update the land use and economic development chapter, we're absolutely going to have to read the small area plans, because there's that addendum that discusses the revitalization districts and the POAs, but also within the larger chapter itself, all of the different POAs are discussed in more detail. So we'll want to make sure that whatever is in, the small area plans continues to be consistent with what we include in the chapter updates. So they're very much intertwined in that way. As staff, when you're looking at our staff analysis and staff reports for like current planning, you'll see that there's a section for comp planning, but there's also a section for small area planning. So they're both long range documents, one looking kind of in a broader scope, and then one looking more specifically at the planning opportunity area or neighborhood the project is in. But they're very much intertwined.
Yeah, just a thought on, I think one of the challenges on land use is that it touches across a number of the other areas. Whereas in the past, and I guess this is what Virginia Tech was trying to point out, we've only attached it to economic development. Excuse me, but obviously it affects housing, it affects environment. Our ability to, our ability to, to get our greenhouse gases reduced is really a function of people being able to get out of cars, and that obviously, relates to land use. So I think it's just, the thing I'm trying to say is I think that's one of the challenges on rewriting land use. So good luck with that.
I would just second that. Like reading the Virginia Tech report, it just struck me that it was sort of like you have the land use chapter, and then you have like little mini chapters of all the other comprehensive plan chapters included in the land use chapter, which is appropriate. But to Mr. Stevens' point, making sure all of those things are talking to each other, and you're not sort of contradicting other chapters in intent in updating the land use chapters is tricky.
So my question would be, to your point, would the land use chapter drive the other chapters, or would the land use chapter be sort of a recounting of everything else. I think the land use chapter driving the other chapters might be a helpful, driving the environmental chapter, driving the sort of touching on all of that stuff might be a useful way to approach it.
I guess I kind of see it as a symbiotic kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's kind of going both ways.
Because it needs to learn from the environmental chapter, like we've set our sort of, what is the title, environment for everyone? We set our goals there, and so those should inform kind of the content of the land use chapter as far as like the environmental approach goes.
I was just gonna say, because like, the land use chapter though, to some degree is, it maybe there is back and forth, but ideally, the land use chapter, informs, the land use map, which informs ultimately, the zoning and how we implement that. And so that's like Planning 101 would say that that's how it's supposed to be, that we set that up, because if you get your land use right, then like transportation in theory works better. The outcome is greener and better for the environment. And if you get your densities right, you get your land uses and your mixes of land use right, then the other things can fall into line. So, I mean, to me that it should be more important than I guess it's been. Given how it's things have evolved over the last 2 decades, I guess. So it probably is time to revisit that, even before I would say the other two that are that old. Just to because so much has changed. I mean, the small area plans, like I said, I think I've taken the role of doing that. That we've used those as a vehicle to, increase density and put, the higher density mixed use projects, where we thought they should go. But ideally, you'd have the land use map looking at the entire city and seeing how that all flows together. I mean, I think one thing that the land use chapter could do that we still struggle with is the interface between our low density neighborhoods and our mixed use. As we saw with the T-zones, the transition is not really, that T-zone was never really working as a transition, and that edge it's pretty sharp because we have our 2 main corridors, where we have most of our non-residential, but it's a really sharp, hard, boundary between those. And I think that's something like the land use chapter can look at and try to explore, how do we, sort of, envision that, we envision always staying that way as like sort of 2 commercial, kind of crossroads, kind of strips, corridors, and, or maybe something more, a little bit more finer scale. So, yeah, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we, would want to look at, in the near term. I think it's overdue.
Yeah. Can I follow up and just ask a quick question on that? Like, these chapters, the comprehensive plan chapters are supposed to look 20, 25 years in the future, right? So, I mean, when we're writing these, we shouldn't be thinking about like describing Falls Church as it is today. We should be thinking about like, what should it be looking like in 20 years?
Correct. There's always an existing condition section, but you're looking into the future.
Yeah. So then I guess my question is like, if we define a vision for Falls Church in 2050, right? Actually, what are we at? 2050. How does that then drive our other like more like, I don't know, things that control like development today, like the future land use map and the existing land use map and the zoning map? Like, so how do the decisions that we're making in that comprehensive plan chapter for the land use then sort of trickle down to those other things that actually drive real development in the city?
That's a good question. It's a very big question too. It really makes me think that, and I think it's land use, like you said, is going to be a really huge effort for planning to update land use and economic development. But it almost makes me think that vision and that chapter could go hand in hand, because you're really visioning, like thinking about what the city would look like in different areas, and what's located in those different areas, and like what are the amenities, and what are the different land uses and zones. So I think it's not exactly the answer to your question, but as I'm brainstorming how we set up like updating these things, it seems that those two should go together. Because I think that, you're looking at the vision to drive the land use, and why not put them together at the same time?
Not to underscore the point, but I mean, that actually drives home why, I would argue that that's why our T-zone process was so difficult and so contentious, was because we didn't have a land use map, roadmap guiding, development. We're doing it backwards. We were saying, all right, we don't like the zoning district. What do we think it should be? And we didn't have, if we had had a land use chapter and a land use map, there had been buy-in and, like community consensus on what we wanted it to be. And then the implementation stage, which is the zoning stage, would have been, doesn't mean there would be no, disagreement, but it would be a lot easier because we could point to, look, we adopted this plan. It was a multi-year effort, and the community consensus is that this is what we want these areas to look like, and we're doing that. Instead, we were just kind of plopping it down and saying, this is what we want to do here, not out of thin air literally, but it kind of felt that way to people. Whereas if we have to do the hard work to do the long-range planning, that's what I think, is so important. And then it sets it up so that it's a little bit easier when you get into those type of discussions, because you're not sort of being accused of, one particular elected official or one, whoever, or one particular part of town saying, we want this. You point to the plan that, was adopted citywide and say, this is what the community at large says that we want to grow and look like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I will say though that we were referencing the housing chapter and the demographics chapter, and there were other chapters of the comprehensive plan that were more recently updated that, at least I was referencing when we were making those deliberations and decisions. So, but I agree with you 100% that having that skeleton of the city that the land use chapter can be up to date is more desirable.
We were definitely pointing at policies, but as we found out, it's real easy to sort of, a lot of people, if you stopped them in front of the Giant and said, do you think affordable housing and new housing types in the city is good? Most people would probably say, yeah, it's really good. And then if you said, do you think it would be good at the corner of Lee and Park? Then they might say, well, maybe not right there, because I live on I live like 2 houses in from there, and I don't know if I want it there. So that's why I like the land use, chapter, which informs the land use map, is so important, because it does bring it down to that level of again, taking those other priorities and putting it into a geographical, space and saying, here's where we want those things to go. And, that way, it's, so that's why it's so important. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think, and we learned the hard way by doing that, and I think that's a great way, even though it was difficult to live through that, I think it did teach us the importance of it. And, so yeah, I think that's something that I think the commission, and staff should really be focusing on in the near term, in the next few years, I think, given it's been 20 since the day.
So just real quick, sorry, go ahead, Emily, to respond to that.
Just thinking about the vision, I think it would be good to go back and kind of take a look at that process in the past and how we were engaging folks, and if that is a chapter that could be picked up with another chapter at the same time, just how intensive it was the last time we updated the vision statement, because it's actually shared with the introduction chapter. So that chapter kind of introduces the comp plan as a whole and what you can find in it and state code and whatnot. And then the vision, I believe, is more towards the end of that chapter 1. So just thinking about process-wise, what that would look like, level of engagement, whatnot.
I think that's my question is, on the earlier slide, you were talking about the timeline for this adoption of whatever new comp plan we work on. What does civic, what is this engagement? I know you mentioned.
It's extensive.
Extensive. What does that include? Yeah. And how does everybody get involved in that?
Yeah, so we've done a variety of different community engagement events in the past for comp plans, for small area plans. We've had community meetings. We obviously visit Planning Commission and City Council, and then a variety of different boards and commissions to review. Something that's been successful for the demographics chapter, we produced a video and put it on our webpage so folks who wanted to learn a little bit more but maybe weren't able to get out to a community engagement event could review and see what it is that we're doing. We've had pop-ups at the library for Tinner Hill, that historic and cultural district. We actually did a pop-up within the district. We've talked about doing pop-ups by Mr. Brown's Park. I believe we did one for the demographics chapter there. So we've been thinking creatively about how to engage the community. I do think when we work on these different chapter updates and the vision chapter, you'll see even more creative approaches in that way. But standard is boards and commission review, including City Council and Planning Commission. And then usually we have a webpage for distribution of kind of where we're at in the schedule, and you can keep up with community engagement events from there.
How much feedback do you usually get in that process? Obviously you'll get a lot from the boards and commissions, but how much do you get from sort of city at large?
Yeah, it depends on the vessel. If we're doing a survey, you could have a larger turnout because people can take that survey from wherever. If we're doing a pop-up, I think it really depends on, the timing, like what day, what time of day, the location. We got great foot traffic at the library when we did a pop-up there for the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District. So I think it depends on, again, the vessel, the meeting type. Community meetings can get great attendance. We also, I know other projects have had town halls, boards and commission town halls where liaisons come and speak with planning commission and staff. So it really depends on exactly what the event is, what the vessel is.
You all did tabling at the high school for the bike plan too, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of creative. Go ahead, Carrie, if you wanted to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, have you ever thought about outreach to multifamily buildings, like doing tabling there? Because I worry that that's a constituency, which is over 50% of our units now in the city, that we really don't hear from very much.
Yeah, so for the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District project, I know I keep referencing that one, but that was a very recent one for me.
Yeah.
We did reach out to the different multifamily buildings right by the district. So I believe there were 2 that we reached out to the leasing office, and they were able to put our flyer on their screens so they could send in feedback residents at those buildings. And I think it's a good way to, distribute information in the future for larger comp plan updates as well. So we could absolutely think about getting the multifamily buildings engaged. I know a lot of them have information screens. My apartment building does. So it could be a creative way to reach folks.
Yeah, maybe even tabling at some of those buildings in the future. I don't know if that sort of overly favors them, going to their front door, but I just love for them to be more involved in the community discussions we're having.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you.
Mr. Kravinsky.
I just wanted to get back to one of the points that Brent was making. So the T-zones were hard, and I think he made a great point, which is it really wasn't in the context of sort of a strategic vision. And at least from my perspective, it was, last year we took on T-zones. It was very challenging. We got there. This year, we're taking on accessory dwellings. It's not as challenging. We're going to get there. I'm not quite sure that there is any vision for 2040, 2050 about where we want land use to be. There isn't some holistic sort of strategy of the things we want to accomplish, what we want our land to look like by 2050. And maybe there is. But I haven't seen it. It seems like we're picking issues on a one-off basis, sort of to tackle them. And if we could put the land use chapter in the context of something broader, what is our vision for our zoning in the next 20 years? What is our vision for land use in the next 20 years? We've had, obviously, zoning was written primarily, I think, in the 1950s. I'm not sure we've holistically looked at the range of things that we want to do to update it at this point. And maybe we have, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a larger discussion to be had about updating, the vision around land use and zoning. But I do want to note that in the 2005 chapter, there are goals, there are strategies. They're stuck at the latter half of the chapter, but there are goals relative to land use, relative to zoning. So those are things that we would have to look at as part of this process and get specific about.
And that's a good point. I was on housing, so I was focused on a lot of the housing in the city council put out strategic priorities, allow for more diverse housing types, strengthen opportunities for people with at differing stages, for first-time home buyers to downsizers, comprehensive plan said you were going to review and revise city policies such as land use and zoning ordinances, things like that. I'm not sure we have a really good roadmap of how we're going to get there to do all of that. And, you know, we're tackling one issue at a time, which is great, and we're succeeding at it. But what we're not doing is saying, what do we want the land use of the city to look like, the housing environment of the city to look like? And there's a whole range of things. You can go from, you know, well, we want to expedite the permitting process. You know, that's an easy one, everybody agrees to, at the other end, you know, we want to get rid of single-family zoning. You know, so we haven't had that discussion about where the city wants to be in terms of land use and zoning. And it might be useful to do that as part of that land use chapter.
Yeah, please.
It almost seems like your outreach event for the vision goes hand in hand with outreach for land use, and that these are developed in tandem, but when you're doing your pop-ups and your surveys and your outreach, we have like a laundry list that covers both, and then we pull it apart and say, this is the chapter one, this is really the land use chapter. And it seems like they can't be developed in isolation. It kind of needs to be all together, and then we just rip it all apart and say this belongs over here and this belongs over here.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. So where's the document, or what's the process where we try to confront the public with the question, how do we afford all the things that we want? You know, look at your picture up here, Cherry Hill and West Falls. I think if you took a poll, you'd probably get a big percentage of people saying, I like that Cherry Hill picture a lot. That's Falls Church to me. But you can't have that unless you do what's in the right-hand picture, unless you're going to have a tax rate that is confiscatory from my perspective. And I mean, it's your job to predict the future. They don't pay you near enough to predict the future. But the average person is not in the business of predicting the future, or even thinking about it. They're thinking about putting food on the table, getting the kids to soccer, you know, getting the Social Security check cashed, whatever. And so there needs to be some mechanism. The small area plans, at least in my time, seem to be the place where economic reality would insert itself into the land use and community character and appearance and design and all of that. So wherever you go with whatever you do, I would try to, you know, introduce folks to the fiscal realities that Falls Church is going to have to evolve and change if it wants to stay very much the way it is in terms of a community with a manageable population, a pretty intimate relationship between citizens and government and all of that. I'm not sure that I have a notion of what the world's going to be like in 2035, but you're going to have to worry about it. I mean, 25 years ago, we would have probably have thought that the solution to how do we pay for what we want would have been big box retail, you know. We were going to put a Heckinger's or whatever it was then, Home Depot, I can't remember, where Tenor Hill is now, and that was going to be the big coup. We did bring in a BJ's, which people sort of forget about because it's on the edge of town, but that was a big, you know, suburban big box play. Well, that didn't, except for the BJ's, that didn't turn out to be the way the economy is going at all. So who knows what it's going to be like in 2035, but having a structure that opens people's eyes to the, you know, inevitable difficulties in predicting what's going to happen would help put some of these one-off issues that we tackle into some context, you know. I guess in closing the thought that just watching what goes on in Arlington, I mean, they had a decades-long community consensus that we're going to develop along the corridor, and we're going to leave your suburban neighborhoods alone. And, you know, there was peace in the valley for, you know, a generation or more over that model. And then that model began to not be able to provide mostly affordable housing or anything close to affordable, even attainable housing. So, you know, they implemented their project to begin to develop accessory dwellings and more dense dwellings. You know, is that the way we're going to go? I guess is my question. Are we going to need to develop the first block in from Broad and Washington more intensively in order to preserve the neighborhood character and provide for housing opportunities and generate the revenue to make ourselves, you know, the great schools, great walkability, great movie theaters, great restaurants, all the great things that we want to be?
Not necessarily a question for staff, question for
Well,
us.
you know, it's not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to be around in 2035.
You're going to help us get there, Mr.
The
Duncan.
staff is, I mean, that's why it's such an exciting job that you have. I mean, it's very important to try to have this conversation with people who do not want to have the conversation because they like things the way they are. Otherwise, why would they pay $1.5 million, $2 million to live here? And you've got to have, you know, meeting after meeting and table after table where you somehow try to convey that to them. Anyway, enough.
But to your question, is the way things are sustainable, like into the future? I think that's the question for us. Yeah. I think there's so many unknowns, right? I mean, like we have this whole AI thing happening in the world, and it's really going to be super disruptive for the way people are working or if people even have jobs. But so like, what are the known things that we have? I mean, this is maybe a conversation for another, but like we know people are going to want to live here. We know we're going to want parks. We know we need to get around. Like there are some pretty basic human needs that I think we can rely on in our that can guide us in our planning for this, updating this chapter, but it's tricky.
Right, and I think some of what Mr. Duncan was talking about relates back to just how dynamic planning is and how ever-evolving this area is. And I think something that's touched on in the comprehensive plan status memo is resilience. So I think we can think about resilience in many ways, economic resilience, environmental resilience, when we're looking at updating comprehensive plan chapters in the future. It's a key term, resilience.
Yeah. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, just an observation. I think the challenge is going forward is to be able to write the plans in such a way that they're flexible and without getting too detailed. Well, I'm just thinking like over the last couple of years, just to kind of pick one dimension, leading up to 2020, there was kind of a slow trend, back towards downtowns. This is becoming kind of repopularized. And then COVID hit, and everybody said, no, we want to go out to the suburbs. And then all of a sudden the federal government says, you all got to come back to the office. And now we're all back, So it's just an example of how difficult it is to predict the future, as Yogi Berra said. So I think the challenge for staff, for all of us, is really how do you write these plans in such a way that they don't get too detailed to something that could quickly change.
I feel like it's zeroing in on those like core values though, right? Like what are the things that we really care about as a community? Sorry, go ahead.
If we can find them.
Yeah, if we agree on what they are. Always a question.
Flexibility is important.
Well, I think I'm hearing consensus that this is the chapter that there's, enthusiasm for updating of these three. That would be the maybe more consequential and immediate action that we could take. Any other?
In tandem with.
In tandem with the vision chapter, yeah. And how to proceed that, it might get kind of messy. I'm not sure how you do that. I don't know, like when you're advertising meetings and stuff like that, like I think we can figure it out, but
Yeah, I think there's.
they are very interrelated.
You guys are really creative about how to get responsive information back from people, even if it's on vision, there's gonna be some things that touch land use. right? And so I think you guys are really creative about kind of teasing that out from your public outreach. I would like to actually see chapter 3 come in behind that, right? Because I feel like if you
Related.
take a look through that chapter about design and everything else, it's holding up some. We have so much development that's happened since in the past 20 years that it's kind of obsolete. So I would like to see that kind of wrap in
I'd second that.
behind in tandem of vision and land use. So.
Yeah, that would be great. I think just keeping an eye on community character, appearance, and design. We have had those recent addendums. And yeah, I think we can take a look at that as a future update after.
Great. Any other thoughts, comments? I hope this has been helpful.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been very helpful for me too.
Okay, great. All right. I think we can move on to the next item, which is the cottage housing.
All right, yes, thank you. Laura Arsenault will present this. Carly Arbery had worked on this. She was the principal planner with staff, and she had actually written the zoning code to go with it. There was a project-specific target, and so it was kind of tested against it, and then it was developed. Then subsequent to that, in 2020, there was a post-review of it, and so then we hit COVID, and the rest is history. So I've asked Laura to look at the case files, and she's going to present that tonight. She's written up a summary of it, and so she's prepared to take questions tonight as well, so for this discussion. So Laura?
Well, you already presented, so. And I also thought about asking Carly to come back and present
That would
too,
have
but
been so nice.
no. No, I didn't do that to her. That's not fair. No, but yes, thank you. I know we got a request for this presentation, so I spent the last couple days reading through this and trying to become as familiar as the new members as well. So I can't promise I have answers for you for your questions, but it was very interesting to learn about this, so I will say that. So once again, this was a request from the Planning Commission, and Gary gave a quick overview, but I will give you a little bit more details. Next slide. So on February 13th of 2017, Council approved Ordinance 1966, which established a residential cottage housing development option through the special exception process in certain R1A zoned parcels. Cottage housing is defined as a grouping of small single-dwelling units clustered around a common area and developed with a coherent plan for the entire site. Council approved cottage housing development provisions that are outlined in section 48-241 of the zoning ordinance. Development requirements for cottage housing include a minimum lot size of 45,000 square feet, density limitations, and minimum yard requirements. They also require design with detached or semi-detached residential structures and defined maximum gross floor areas. The building height was restricted to 1.5 stories or 25 feet and required the inclusion of porches. The buildings need to be oriented to face other units or a common area, and amenities were to be provided. A defining characteristic was a shared community building on the property. There are also building coverage restrictions, impervious surface restrictions, and garage and accessory structure usage restrictions. Next slide, please. Also, on February 13th, Council approved 3 additional conditions. One was that no more than one special exception for cottage development may be approved in 1 calendar year. The second was that applications accepted and processed must be in the order which complete applications were delivered to the city. And within 3 years of enactment of this ordinance, the city manager will bring City Council an analysis of the applications with a recommendation for continuation, amendment, or repeal of this ordinance. Next slide, please. So on February 3rd, 2020, City Council had a work session to review this ordinance. Staff made a few recommendations. One was to remove the 55-year age restriction. The second was to amend that the development must be located within 500 feet of a revitalization area, and to modify it to be located within a quarter mile of a revitalization area. 3 was to consider allowing the use in R1B zoning district. And 4 was to amend the minimum lot size requirement from 45,000 square feet to 33,750 square feet. There was one cottage development in, not 1997, I'm sorry. That was a good year, but it was not 1997. In 2017, was Railroad LLC. The development had 10 cottage units, each approximately 1,500 square feet inside, and shared common open space with one community house. This development, which age restricted for persons 55 years and older. There were 2 other cottage developments that had been discussed, but they were located outside of the 500-foot revitalization area buffer. Next slide, please. So just a quick summary. The cottage development, SE, was created in February of 2017. We had one development that came in, and it was reviewed 3 years later, right before COVID hit, which is, I think, why it got stalled. And then we are here tonight. There was no further action from council after February of 2020.
Understandably.
And so here we are, 5 years later. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I know, Mr. Stevens, this was an item that you had asked for, so I just want to pass it to you if you have any questions right off the bat.
Well, I think, Gary, you kind of introduced it pretty much on track. We were in the process of kind of considering changes to the code, and then between COVID and Carly having left, I think it all kind of came to a halt. It strikes me, we've got the benefit of history. We've seen the one project that got built is, I think by every reaction that I've heard, very successful. Something that I think many of us would like to see more of if there are some opportunities in the city. It's interesting going back and listening to the city council session where they adopted the ordinance, and our own esteemed Commissioner Duncan was on the dais at that time. But there was, it's kind of reminded me of accessory dwellings. There was a lot of concern. Are these things going to proliferate all over the place? Are we going to run into all kinds of unintended consequences? Well, like I say, with the benefit of history, we've kind of seen that it didn't exactly happen that way. I mean, there's always, risk of something happening that you don't particularly want. But I think we've got enough knowledge of this that I would like to see the ball kind of picked back up and see if we can't kind of continue the progress that where we were before. So thanks for pulling this together and kind of sharing back the history with us. I think the 4 recommendations are good. I think they're certainly worthy of discussion in the current context. We've had a lot of time pass, so people's views and maybe context and all of that would be worthwhile kind of having a look at again. But otherwise, I think the changes that are proposed are a really good starting place to pick this back up again.
Great, thanks, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Polinsky?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about the revitalization area. What is a revitalization area?
Jack, can you pull up the map? If you go down a couple. It's in the slide deck. Yeah.
It's our main business districts.
Okay.
No, go. It's at the end.
Areas.
Yeah. So it's the area in red, but it's the main commercial areas of the city.
Okay.
For all extensive purposes.
And has there been, I know COVID probably put a damper on new development type things, but has anybody even shown interest in additional developments outside of the ones on Railroad?
So there were 2.
Oh, there were 2. Is it?
Where were they? For people who don't know, like where were they?
2 proposed that didn't happen,
No, I know,
to be
like
clear.
Where were the
Outside.
sites that they were interested in?
I do not know. I didn't get that far, but I can look into it.
On Lincoln.
Lincoln what?
Lincoln between Meridian and Yucatan. He has a property that goes up back. Yeah, it's a pretty big parcel. I don't know if that's still in play at this point. Maybe.
And what was the logic behind constraining it to either 500 feet or a quarter mile from the revitalization? Why wouldn't we allow it? It looks like it's actually a whole lot of the city. It's only a few strips of the city that are now excluded.
It was a new thing back then, and I think a lot of people were just a little nervous about it. Yeah, let's, we'd like to see it, but let's put enough constraints on it that, we can pretty well assure nothing
I mean, at this
really
point,
bad's gonna happen.
the south end of the city, I guess, is excluded, but a whole lot of the rest of the city is eligible with a quarter mile buffer from the revitalization zones.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my question, is like, if there is it a chicken and egg thing, where more people would be interested if there was a wider buffer? Like, should we take any action on this kind of thing, as opposed to, there's nobody coming to bring anything with it, so we should prioritize other things?
That's the right question. And, in some ways, looking back on it now, this was our effort to, like Tim said, preserve single-family detached housing neighborhoods from incursion by the, evil, whatever, cottages monster. I mean, people were, I had to go door to door.
There were a lot of signs in our neighborhood. I did not know what
Absolutely,
it meant.
your neighborhood, Ellison Street, I mean, I went door to door that summer trying to sell the idea, and, there were people who put their house up for sale when we passed, people felt very strongly about it, but against the cottages.
Oh,
In
the
spite-
railroad colleges.
Yeah, right, railroad cottages. But- Yeah, and you look at the map now and you wonder, what if we expanded, the townhouse zone or some version of T-zones to include some of the area that, we set aside for prospective cottages. And that would help people visualize, what it is that.
Do we have any idea if those houses have turned over at all, or the people who bought them in 2017 are still in them? They have?
That's a good
The
question.
railroad
I'm not sure.
cottages, they very rarely come on the market. I think
haven't
people
seen
who,
them.
People like it. They
they've
want
been
them.
on
Yeah.
the Falls Church Educational Foundation, the Home and Garden Tour. They did that one maybe like 3 tours ago. And the person who shared their home with the community for the tour was raving about it. They were there. So yeah, I don't think they come on the market very often because people who bought them like them.
And just to reiterate what Tim was saying, from my about the positive reviews that the railroad cottages got, to me, I'd rather see 10 railroad cottages than to see, 3 or 4 lots demolished for McMansions. I think there's some, just visually, they look good, they're attractive, they add to the neighborhood, I think. So I'm not sure why the constraint to the revitalization areas corridor is important at this point. That's mine.
Well, I think part of the rationale too was parking. It sounds kind of funny to say it that way, but the thought was we're going to limit these to 1 parking space. But to make that work, you got to have access to transportation. And so the thought was if you're close to Broad Street and Washington Street, then you can get by with 1 parking space. So that's just my.
No, that's right. The bike
theory.
trail was a big plus, too, for the location, because there are people who move there and said, oh, this is great, I can go up and down the bike trail to restaurants, groceries, and so forth. Can you go back to the screen that has the guardrails, bullet points? on it?
I think Carly actually mentioned the trail as being another, like,
Yeah.
you could consider,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
there are people who.
moving out from that too.
So I guess the one right before this, no, the one that had the size, the lot size, was that, what was that? Okay. Zoning rights, minimum lot size, 40,000 square feet. So how big is that? Let's see, that's,
It's like
That's an acre. So it's
four R1A lots.
12,000 feet is quarter acre, right? So
But they made a recommendation to reduce that.
Yeah,
to
right. So
3.
we knocked it down to basically 3/4 of an acre. So I could, you know, get together with my neighbor to the back and to the side. And on West Street, we could demolish our ancient and no longer desirable homes and replace them with cottage structures. That was the out there vision, you know, that you could actually have infill development in residential neighborhoods that would offer an option to older, particularly people who wanted a one-level living and certainly didn't need 2 cars, and maybe didn't even need 1. So they would be close enough to walk to all the amenities that we were gonna build, which we basically did build, grocery stores particularly. Is there anything in this that instructs us, okay, maximum height of 1.5 stories or 25 feet? Jack, where are we now on accessory dwellings? What are we allowing as of Monday night?
For height,
Yeah, for height.
1 story or 15 feet, depending on, for a 5-foot setback, or a maximum height of 1.5 stories.
20 feet.
So we're kind of in the ballpark, but see, we were more ambitious with this than we are willing to be with accessory dwellings for reasons that don't completely compute for me. But
I think the accessory dwelling was more to be a subordinate structure for support to the house, not a redevelopment of your entire lot. So
Yeah.
you could, in theory, create additional dwelling space on your property for your own care or for your kids or for whoever's moving back without having to go through the expense of wiping your lot.
Cottage housing is a primary, basically, right?
Is the primary dwelling.
everything.
Right, so this gives you a different option. So,
So based on where we're living today with accessory dwellings, what would happen if we just reminded people, hey, you know what? You know, 3 of you could get together and we could have a cottage development there.
The cottages, they're still age restricted, right? The
Yeah.
cottages?
The proposal, though, is to remove the age
Yeah,
restriction.
right.
The ones that have been built are, yeah.
Railroad
The ones that-
imposed that on itself though, right? I mean, we did,
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember. Was that something that the city required?
no, I don't think so.
It's not in the ordinance that it has to be age
No, I
restricted,
don't
is it?
think so.
Or is it? I don't recall.
I think it is, because
think it
she's recommending that we remove that restriction.
Oh, so
I don't
it
think
is
it
in
was
there.
just for that development.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
It is in, so it is 55 and over?
I recall there being some concern that there was gonna be daycares set up in there, and so that's kind of where this.
Well, they were concerned
55
about families and needing more
Yeah.
cars and
Yeah.
so the idea was an empty nester type of situation, or
Yeah.
55 and over would, you wouldn't have that issue as much. I mean, yeah, and again, it was, I think, it was the first time we had done it, and so there was understandable concern about how it would work. But I do think, I mean, it is a little bit different if you had just a without the age restriction, because if you start having family, if you have more bedroom counts in there and, larger families, you're gonna, the parking does become an issue. That's just a reality, like we can't ignore that, so it's just things we'd have to look at, I think, with the cottages. I mean, I think they've worked in that location, although I remember, obviously that location had a lot of constraints, of course, access was tough there. I remember the fire access and other things, and the weird nature of Railroad Avenue being what it is, like, and so,
Yeah, but the,
yeah, there's just not that many places in town where it could work. I mean,
Right.
and that was set up, I guess, intentionally. It was limited, so there aren't that many properties that you could ever have that.
well, that raises another question, actually. What do you think about, I mean, a lot of the criticism at the time was this is, you know, single-shot zoning that you're doing for the benefit of one developer who's brought this project. I mean, we must have had to fight that monster.
was some
you know,
of that.
for
I mean-
months and months, we had had that monkey on the back. So, you know, I think that influenced the T-zone approach. It was like, okay, let's open it up. Let's have other areas that qualify. And that was criticized because.
The same developer
you know,
owned that land too,
it was too broad now, but there were other developers, there were other owners.
which is
who-
interesting, right?
There are other, oh, well, some people, it's a good thing we have a class of people here who are more entrepreneurial, because, you know, we need that.
We do need that.
But,
Yeah,
you know-
we say we want that small incremental development, and yet the developers that are building it for us are not normally thanked for what they're doing, like this project. It's
Anyway,
a shame,
I
in
drove
my
over
opinion.
to Railroad just one middle of the day, middle of the week, you know, and was, to check out the parking, you know, because the parking was a big concern.
Yeah.
And I was pleased to see that on just an average typical day, you know, there was no excess overflow parking. The covered units that they offer were not completely full, which means some people probably are using their cars to go somewhere, but could mean that some people just don't have cars. There, you know, I remember one of the early buyers was a grandma who was moving to be closer to her grandchildren in Falls Church, and she didn't need a big car. She got driven everywhere she needed to go and could walk to the other places. So the vision worked out, I think, pretty well, and the conditions that it replaced were so awful. It's,
I think the city also kind of did a good thing by allowing 5% additional density in exchange for putting in, you know, solar on their parking garage. And, you know, that's the type of incentive, I think, that using the zoning code struck me as being, you know, a good thing. Be interesting if we are able to go ahead with this, is to consider a way to do this without the whole special exception, because this still has to go through special exception, you know, and that's
discouraging.
that's a real discouraging element, is to go with the by right, but put in the things that we really want. Put in an affordable housing, you know, requirement. The environmental issues, we could put that in the way we want. Maybe nobody will respond to it, I don't know, but it's a good opportunity to use the zoning code to achieve the goals that we want, so.
And I would say on the age issue, I mean, all of our documents talk about providing housing for the range of families and different age groups. I mean, we keep talking about, what is it, first-time home buyers to downsizers. So if we're gonna take that seriously, we can't continue to create ordinances that for only older people. We have to open it up to the range of families and individuals that we want in the city.
Mr. Polinsky?
I'm just keeping an eye on my watch. We have like an hour left.
Okay.
Didn't know if we needed to. This is also really interesting to me, not trying to move us along, but I want to make sure we are able to cover the last two items on here.
Yeah. All right, so I think we can debate the merits of this. I guess as a next step, I'm trying to think about how we can get this, if we as a commission agree that we would like to have council kind of direct us to pursue this. I'm not sure exactly how the process works. Would we send a letter to council and say, hey, y'all talked about this in 2020, maybe we can take another look at it, here's what we think?
I think, I think we could do three things, actually. So I think we could do that as one, as part of the, you know, the next discussion we're having. It could go on recommendation to the city council's work plan. So at least, you know, it's going to be built into that. But we could go ahead and approach them now. And, you know, we could also, you know, look at the current work plan that we have. And there may be some opportunities to, and we're going to talk about that next, to have a project that ends up in this calendar year or on its own. And so, you know, we'll be talking about that a little bit, and this could be one of those, and the letter would introduce that concept. And then I think, you know, for the for sure thing, you want to build it into your annual report and as a recommendation for in January when the council looks at their list of priorities.
That sounds
I think
good.
staff capacity is kind of a key key
Yeah,
thing too.
yeah. I think there may be some capacity towards the end of this calendar year. We're looking at a couple things and, yeah, and so, if you can prioritize things like this, then they can be on a short list, and if we have the opportunity to move them in, and that's kind of question two we're gonna ask you in a few minutes, is if there's something that's not on here that we might, wanna move up from future work resources. It could be one of those, or it could be something new that we add in, and this could be one, as an example. And so anyway, then there may be some opportunity to, so that's like one that's not up here, and then maybe we could move up one. So we'll have to see. We're waiting on some funding, some resources for certain projects that are up here, and so, there's a little lag right now. Some things are on hold on funding, so we can take a further look at that. But if you identify this or others tonight, then that can be on our short list. So
Okay,
that's
that
what
sounds good.
I'm offering to have a short list through this current calendar year. So anyway, yep.
That sounds good. Just to be clear, though, like, city council has to, they have to sort of take it up and say, yeah, we want to invest
Well,
like staff
your
resources.
letter could do it out of turn, is what I'm saying. So you can build it into their work plan, or they could say out of turn, they would like to, and at a minimum, if we have the capacity, we could prep it at least. And then when it makes their work plan in January, then
Okay.
we're not just sitting there starting it.
Yeah.
And so if
You're
I had
already
some capacity
done.
later this year, and so there may be an opportunity for that, and I'm saying, for a couple of projects, so we'll see, but if you identify those, that'll be helpful. So, yep, they can help inform the calendar year projects, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's a good segue into the next item, I think.
Yes.
So the 2025 Planning Division Work Plan.
So I provided, it's on this poster here, you've got a oversized copy of this. This looks different from what you saw in the fall in terms of this work plan. This is reflecting where we are as of today on the Planning Division Work Plan. And so what I'm really calling this is a status update, and this will help inform you as to where we are, and then, give you a little background information so you can talk about your priorities for council and their work plan, which is, what we're going to do in just a few minutes here. So this just is provided for some background. So the benefits of the work program, next slide, is a shared vision. We have multiple teams working towards the same goals, and, that's both, inside and outside City Hall and the community. Then we have external consistency. So, we have the council work plan, and then we have consistency across departments, and we collaborate on a lot of things. And then feasibility. So, the balance between our routine work, which is, steady work. We have planning commission agendas, council agendas every week. And so we have this steady work that we have to do, and then there's work that's mandated, and then we have special projects. So in terms of adequate staff and time, that's one of the, and resources, we look at that. So next slide. So back in November, you saw a draft of this with Paul, the work plan, and it was discussed, and you can see the milestones and schedule. The staff talked about it in October. It was then presented to you in November. Then in March, we're having the Planning Commission advance now, and it's changed since then. And anyway, and then next we go to the CPED's budget that we're in currently, and then the council will adopt their budget, and that'll, provide resources for this as well. Next slide. So second thing we look at is community vision and planning's role. Next slide. So we have the vision chapter, and so that helps inform the community vision, and then CPED's mission, which is our departmental mission, and that's part of the budget narrative for FY26. And so we look at, integration of both vision and mission. Next slide. So planning with the community, the local groups that we support, our city council, planning commission, AAB, CACT, ESC, Historic Commission, and the HARB. And then we work with a number of regional bodies as well in the planning realm. Next slide. So the planning program areas that we're in are current planning, the special exception, site plans, subdivisions, rezonings, comp plan amendments. Then we have the long range, the small area planning, comprehensive planning, special studies, data research. Transportation, we have local and regional policy and coordination. We have CIP grant projects, NTC, RPP, bike share. Then we have the environmental sustainability with CEAP, energy programs, and then project review and lead. Then zoning updates, we've worked on a number of text amendments and cleanups as well. Next slide. This is the current planning division organizational chart. As you know, we have a vacancy at director. I'm acting. We also have a vacancy at our departmental director level. And so we've promoted several staff members as acting deputies and principal planner in order to backfill the deputy position and keep us focused on our work plan. Next slide. So looking at the work program itself, next slide. So we look at work requests, we receive inputs, so it's from you as a planning commission, it's from community groups. We look at it from internally as best practices in planning, as the staff, and then the council work plan is one of the major inputs. So we look at resources, which is both budget and staffing, and then we look at how we can sustain results on our work plan. Next slide. So this was the work plan that you saw back in the fall, and so it's organized by planning program. You can see those across the top: current planning, long-range planning, transportation planning, environmental planning, and zoning. And so this builds into our routine work on the column on the left, and then we space it by time. We do it in 6-month increments. So January through June is the increment that we're in now, and then we have the latter part, half of the year. So we, working on budget now, and sometimes there's budget constraints, sometimes there's stretch goals. And so, we apply the resources and work on the plan. And so right now, we're working on all these things to some extent. Then you look at the bottom, and so you see the blue, that's for operating budget and best practices. That's kind of our core work that we're doing. And the purple reflects the council work plan items that have come to us. And then the community and energy is in green, and the community requests are in the other category. Next slide, please. So this is the current work plan that was updated from the one you just saw. And so, having shown that, you can see the number of purple representing all the council work plan items that we're working on currently in the first half of the year and the second half. Many of those are extending the entire year in terms of calendar year. I've put the little flags on there. It's kind of I haven't done that before. That shows collaboration. So we're not necessarily leading all of those, but we're collaborating to either we're providing research and some kind of consulting advice on if it's a comp plan amendment, how do you go through that process? Or in some cases, we're leading the entire process, even though DPW might be the lead on it. For example, Streetscape is one of those. So you can see the blue, which is our core work and some of the applications under current planning. And then you see under long-range planning, in the blue, you see the current work on the comp plan chapters. And we just finished the TAP with ULI on the property yard, Gordon Triangle, and then under, down under future work programs, we've got listed the vision and the community character chapter and the land use and economic development chapter, which we just talked about. Looking at transportation, We've got a full plate always on that, and so we're doing a lot of things with that. And then environmental planning, there's a lot of energy programs that we've gotten funding for. And so, there's been a lot of progress in that area. And zoning updates, Jack's lived through a couple of those now. He's got the T-zones done, and he's approaching the final council public hearing on accessory dwelling units. We're going to be looking at tree canopy as applied to commercial and mixed-use projects, and then residential parking, multifamily. And then we have some zoning cleanups that we've been meaning to get back to. And then a future B2 district, commercial uses. That kind of feeds off of the retail study that recommended some new uses that we look at that. So we see that as a future work program listed here. Next slide.
Before we go on, I
Yeah.
feel like it's the most important question on this slide. Are golf carts a thing?
Yeah.
Do people have golf carts?
Yeah, I see them
Really?
around town.
Seen one or two.
That just like go
Not a
around the
lot,
city?
not a lot, but yeah, no, I saw one like last night, like.
Really?
Drive down our street, and it was like a
Never
dad
seen-
and a kid, a
I've
couple
never
kids
seen-
maybe.
And I mean, I've seen people.
We
in
live
them,
in a
like-
2.2 square mile area, so why not,
Because as long
I
as you
don't know,
have,
that's my,
it's gotta be street legal, you have to have like break.
Yeah, I mean, there's
yeah, yeah.
requirements for it.
Yeah, it wasn't a rinky-dink one, it was a nice
All right, sorry,
cart.
No,
I'm
I mean,
surprised by that particular one.
the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, e-bikes, scooters, golf carts, yeah.
Yeah, this is
Anyway,
Mr.
but-
Duncan's dream.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, Phil? Jim Snyder's
Yeah,
dream.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so, yeah. But it's primarily e-bikes and scooters, but yes.
Without any help from the city, it's happening.
Not trying to distract, it just was very
No,
confusing.
yeah. So, any other questions on this at this point? Yeah? No, I mean, this is the calendar work. This is the work we're in right now, and we'll be doing the rest of this year. And then we have, the other things teed up, ready. Next slide, please. So the planning division back in October, we looked at the previous version of this, and we came up with some list of things that we thought were important. And so next slide. So it's 2 pages. Next slide. And then in your advance a year ago, January 2024, while you did look at it in November with Paul, there was 3 questions that were asked back then, and you came up with a short list of projects here noted by the bullets. And so this was from a year ago from your exercise at your planning advance, which was more of an activity and so forth. And so we really kind of did a whole activity program to kind of identify those, but I wanted to make sure that those were relisted. So we're going to visit these questions here in just a moment. So next slide. This was the second part of that, and that was the work program you'd seen back then. So we've given you a copy of that in your materials tonight, so you can reference it as well. We can go back to the slide. Next slide. So just to kind of wrap up current planning, ongoing, we have the West Falls Phase 1 finishing out. All the buildings are up for Phase 1, and so Founders Row, the theater will be coming online in the spring, and that'll be the final piece of that. Founders Row 2, they're in the middle of their occupancy now. They're on their 4th floor out of 7. Broad in Washington is finished now. Quinn was just approved. Maple and Annandale is still in the early stages. Then we have the 2 townhouse projects, and then a couple of small commercial projects, the jewelry and Econo-Ice. Future work, West Falls is a little further out. It's a smaller second phase, more office oriented. One City Center, we make contact with them several times a year, and they're not in any mode to come back at this point. T-zones, we've had several inquiries recently after that ordinance was passed. We've got a couple infill special exceptions that we've talked to, and then a rezoning as well. So next slide. So I'm going to let Emily she's going to highlight this in less than a minute, and then we'll be almost finished here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gary. So I just want to take a look at the long-range planning slide really quick, specifically at recently completed first. So this is from calendar year 2024 to 2025. Annually, we're producing the 5-year outlook as well as the annual community profile. In 2024, we had 2 different comp plan projects. So we had our Chapter 2 update to the demographics chapter. That actually followed a demographics study that was done in partnership with the Stephen Fuller Institute at George Mason. We also had that addendum to Chapter 3. It was the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District. So both of those were comp plan projects in 2024. We also worked on the ULI TAP. I know I saw several planning commissioners at that event, so thank you all for coming. So that was hosted on January 30th and 31st, and we're working towards getting a final report. So when that report is published, we'll of course circulate it with the Planning Commission and set up a web page where you all can review. Also in 2025, we had the honorary renaming of Wilson Boulevard to Saigon Boulevard. That was a follow-up project to the East End Small Area Plan. We had 3 different in-language signs put up in the East End near Eden Center. Ongoing projects. So we're working on that Chapter 8 update. We're also partnered with HHS on the Affordable Living Policy update. And recently we began work on the Commercial Streetscape Standards Amendment. For future work, we have a couple of different comp plan chapters up there, some of which we talked about tonight. And then we also have the West End Small Area Plan updates following the ULI TAP on the Gordon Road Triangle. That's all from Long Range Planning.
All right, next is Carrie with Transportation.
Yeah, so recently completed, we had the South Washington Street Planning Opportunity Area Pedestrian Improvement Study, the Trips Run Trail Study, the Bike Master Plan update, which was completed January 27th of this year, the East-West Connection Study, which looked at that connection between the W90 Trail and the secondary schools campus, wrapped up over the summer last year. Ongoing, the Wilson Boulevard Safety Improvement Study, that's a joint study with Fairfax and Arlington counties. That's through COG, looking at how we can repurpose some space in sort of the roadway there, and then also, crosswalks and other improvements with that repurposed space, widened sidewalks. Oak Street Elementary School missing link study, so that's through the VDOT Ready, Set, Go. It's a technical assistance study looking at 3 segments where there are currently no sidewalks at all, so what we can do there. And then the East-West connection between the W90 Trail and secondary schools campus. So that received funding through the October budget amendment for design, and then some construction funding proposed, and sort of doing work on that now. Bike share phase 2. Neighborhood traffic calming, 8 or 9 cases, I think, active, and we have completed 3 or 4, maybe over the past year or so, year and a half. Residential permit parking, the Zone 3 case near Madera Falls Church, also known as Founders Row 2. Work on that is ongoing. Greenway Downs, we are awaiting authorization to advertise. That should go to bid soon. Capital Bike Share, and then regional coordination with those groups you saw earlier. Some future work, and sort of we did already start the standard TDM's work, but some additional TDM support, the shared use mobility policy update that Kurt is going to take on, grant applications, always sort of looking at what's on the horizon there. Bike to Work Day is coming up, I believe May 15th or 16th, whatever the Thursday is. It's on a Thursday instead of a Friday this year. Parking Day in the fall. DPW is the lead on Vision Zero and Complete Streets. They are doing some work on Vision Zero now. We had, a couple meetings about it, so, yeah.
Thank you. And then environmental, Kurt, please.
Tim, there you are.
There we go. All right, so for environmental sustainability planning, for recently completed, we've got the one-stop shop for community energy action. You can see it's also in the ongoing section as we've completed much of the online portion, that's text and outside resources and that sort of thing. Now we're gonna start producing more videos for people to see and add a couple more pages to the online section. Also under recently completed is Building Greener, Green Building and Site Design Concepts for Commercial Development in Falls Church. So that was published and is now available in the planning library last spring. And that gets used when we see development projects come in for review. And also in the photo is the Cherry Hill Farmhouse energy efficiency improvements and video. So that was a great project last fall. Ongoing, we have routine work. I serve as ESC liaison. I do the development review with that Building Greener document as mentioned before. Some regional coordination, and I help out with the rest of the city's environmental programs when needed. Also ongoing is the Commercial Energy Audit Program and Residential Energy Audit Program. In December, we applied for a grant from Virginia Department of Energy to stand up a residential energy audit program in the city. It's been paused for a little bit, but we've had some good news recently and are hoping to move forward with funding that program very soon. And then once that gets squared away, we will continue moving forward with the Commercial Energy Audit Program. Number 5, there is no-cost home energy programs for senior and low to moderate income homes provided by CHP. That's something that we've been trying to advertise since last May and get people to sign up for. And also there's the Community Energy Action Plan progress reporting, specifically trying to identify some metrics for us to track things like electric vehicle adoption, people electrifying their homes, and getting rooftop solar. And then in the future work section is promoting and supporting golf carts, scooters, and e-bikes, as well as exploring personal property tax incentives for people with alternative fuel vehicles such as electric vehicles.
Thank you, Kurt. And then zoning. Yes.
All right, in zoning world, there's been some notable updates or milestones recently, beginning with in 2021, the special exception criteria was amended. In 2023, the city adopted permanent outdoor dining provisions, which was led by Laura Arsenault over there. And also in 2023, the city adopted updates to its T1 transition zone districts. And in 2024, the city also approved reductions to commercial parking for existing commercial buildings. Ongoing, of course, is the accessory dwelling initiative that's scheduled to wrap up in April of this year. Council's final consideration date is April 14th. And then in future work, these are largely characterized as cleanup items. These are these are items that have been identified by zoning and planning staff as being either out of compliance with state code through state code updates that local code hasn't kept up with, or are items that are generally are in need of update, like specifically something that's come into your correspondence section tonight. It's also included in your physical materials as the BZA's recommendation for updating the city's sign ordinance. That's included as, I think, the third item under the residential, administration and procedures.
Yeah, it's the top one.
Okay, great. So anyway, these are the sign ordinance specifically is one that the BZA gives variances to regularly, and so it is good practice to basically codify these things that do receive variances with higher frequency than other items. So that's one of those that I wanted to flag specifically.
Anyway, so thank you for the opportunity to put the details behind this chart because, that's, you can kind of see what goes into all this work program. So this is just a chart that we use for tracking as our department is working on council work plan items, and they're tracked out over the two fiscal years, 25 and 26. Next slide. It's a continuation of that to show that sequence. So now we're at the end where we want to talk about the projects that you may want to include in terms of adding to this work plan list. Number one talks about of the projects already scheduled. So the ones that are already scheduled for January and to June, we have the second half of the year, June and December, and there may be some opportunities as things shift around, for maybe one or two things to move up from this category of the future work and so forth. And so the first question to you is, if any, is there any identifiable projects that we've talked about or something that you have an idea about? Number two is what projects should be included that maybe are not even on this future work list. And I think cottages is one example of that tonight or something. And maybe that could be added in and worked in either to the second half of this year or, at least built into the work plan, that you're informing to council. And then the last one is really the core one that you want to talk about tonight is what projects should be included in the next council work plan. Right now, they have a February 2025 strategic initiatives that are reflected in this chart, and then they'll be doing in January of 2026 their next work plan for a 2-year, to be 26 and 27. So your comments, to them would inform that. So next slide. So we wanted to start the discussion. We want to just open it up to you now. I think the first two are as described. Is there something that if we had the opportunity to move up? And the next question, would be about if there's something missing that we might want to add in to then tee up. And then the last is, open it up and all the ideas and thoughts you might have and, for ideas for the council work plan. So the thought is we would just do them one by one. I think the first two would be, kind of not a long list or.
Sure, you mean sort of column by column, current planning, and then
so,
long range?
And so what we would do is, go ahead and, I think, I guess on this slide, we can just leave this up or basically go to this, so we just show them the final, tally.
I think green building standards might be under long-range planning in that earlier slide.
So anyway, go back one. So what I was just saying is, for number 3, it would be the main thing that you wanted to focus on tonight is informing the council work plan. So go to the next one. And so these are the categories we would look at, making a list, and putting it under the category, and then we could prioritize it to the extent we can tonight. So, and then what we're thinking of is go back to 1 then, so hopefully. So of the projects already scheduled for June and December or future work items, are there any that, if we had the opportunity to move something from this category up, are there any, doesn't have to is there some that are here? And then the next question, number 2, is going to be, is there any that aren't even listed here? If we had the opportunity, should we move them in? So,
sure.
And then I think that's kind of a shorter discussion, and then we'll go into the longer one.
Okay.
We're opening it up to everything, so.
Sounds good. So do you want us to take it sort of column by column then? So current planning, I feel like we're already basically in June. I don't know, it's the end of March.
Yeah.
So I would sort of, I don't know about reallocating June to December projects to now. I mean, it's up to you all, like if you want to reprioritize things that way. But I think so the Tinner Hill, can you describe what that interactive mapping project is? I'm not familiar with that.
So that's under current planning right now. Our planning intern, Tasmin and Cameron are both working on that, and they work closely with long range planning. So it's kind of a long range planning project, but from what I understand, they're working on story maps, and it's a collection of historic
Oh,
and
so it's,
cultural
okay.
resources around the district. So you just pull it up from your phone, or just a device, your laptop, and take a walk around the district digitally and look at the different historic markers that are there, the art that's in the area, and just learn more about the historic and cultural district of Mapping.
Cool. Yeah, I love that idea.
And kind of planning for that project too. So it's really in like a kickoff stage right now.
Early stage. It sounds like it pairs well with the planned work that you have for June to December, the Tinner Hill South Gate, like the rezoning. So my understanding is there are a couple properties that are zoned sort of like commercial, right? Or that they are residential. Is that right? I feel like we saw this once before.
Jack's been working on this one.
Oh, the rezoning, Southgate. Rezoning. Tenor.
But that's under current planning, or it's under the zoning updates?
I guess it could be under either, but I think it's under current planning as we have it. But it is a proposed rezoning of residential properties in the Tinner Hill and Southgate neighborhoods that were improperly zoned commercial and have been zoned commercial since the city's had a zoning code, basically, but they've always been single-family homes.
Yeah.
And so the city's in a discussion with the residents to rezone their properties correctly to single-family, either R1A or R1B. So we're having ongoing discussions with them about that.
So council had funded some property survey work and stuff to support the rezoning kind of for the residents rather than end up having to be the full applicant. And so they're kind of sponsoring it. They had approached them a couple of years ago. So we're waiting for some affidavits that, were there in agreement to, apply for a rezoning for them, basically. And so we're in the final stages of that. That's actually a council work session item coming up this week, so.
And there'd be no charge to the residents. This would
Right.
obviously be a city-fronted initiative.
Any thoughts on current planning? It strikes me that current planning is an area where you want to have some flexibility because you just never really know what's going to come across the transom, right? Like what in terms of development projects. So something like the Tinner Hill interactive mapping seems like a good, nice long-term project that you can work on if you're able to, but doesn't have a hard deadline. Maybe. I don't know. Any thoughts from the other commissioners on this column?
That particular project we're scoping right now, it's a new initiative, so we're just in the discussion scoping phases on that. But we do have an intern that has a specialty in GIS.
Cool.
That, we're hoping to keep her for a while, but we never know. And so at this point, she has the specialty for this. So, we're scoping it, but we still haven't scheduled it. And so that's why it's under future work, but we do have the resources to do it.
Is it because, I guess my question is, are we doing it because we have the resources and why not? Because we can do it? Or was it already planned and now we happen to have the resources?
It was a follow-up to the heritage designation. And you want to speak to that just briefly?
Right. We did have a similar project in the comp plan addendum that was adopted this past year for the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District, and there's been some interest in having interactive mapping in the past around the district. And like Gary said, we have someone on the team who has great GIS skills, who's excited about story maps, and we're beginning to scope for this project.
So it was a recommendation that came out of that work. So it's kind of
So if I could ask, that should tie in with the 250th observance effort, right? I mean, that would be a natural historic contribution by Falls Church to that celebration.
That's a great point. Good timing.
Spent last week driving up and down 81 to Tennessee, and I'm struck by how many signs there are on the highway calling out, ye old historic mugwump. I mean, every town claims to have some story to tell to pull people off the highway. And that's good, fine, but it gets a little, the National Firearms Museum is a little suspicious, but whatever. But we don't have anything like that, and we actually have, at least 4 or 5 historic cultural attractions, if you count Cherry Hill, Tenor Hill, other attributes that are, I don't know if they meet the standard for a highway sign, but they are part of our historic story, and I would say if you've got somebody who can do it, try to keep the foot on the gas on that.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Did you mention the Lee Street conditional rezoning? Yeah. From R to T? on
Yeah,
south?
it's listed on their January, June as a startup there.
Okay,
It's right here.
so just to start it up, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
we have an application
Yeah.
we'll be processing, so.
We
Yeah,
haven't seen it,
so-
so.
Anyway, so maybe the best thing is we just go ahead and go to the discussion of the ideas that you guys have for the work plan, and then if we identify some that fall in this maybe earlier category, then we can just kind of float them up from there, from that overall discussion.
We can do it now or later. On the long-range planning for the vision and community character chapters and the land use chapters, which you have as future work for 25, I think we need a little prep work going into that chapter, and probably something you could do concurrent with your update of the Chapter 8, the Utilities and Infrastructure chapter. So my concern is on those chapters, those upcoming chapters. We have a lot of vision statements out there right now that are talking about, inclusive communities and, work proactively to ensure affordable housing keeps pace with population increases available for a range of income, household sizes, generations, and needs. So, Chair Camont sent out a great article indicating that we are going in exactly the opposite direction of that vision. It was the housing, it was titled Housing Costs Force Exodus of Young Families from Northern Virginia. And in it, it sort of called out Falls Church as the #1 expensive place to live in Northern Virginia. So I kind of feel like we need, and I understand that, it's market forces. There's a lot of reasons we're becoming more and more expensive. The average house is, $1 million is according to the report. I think if you look at just single-family houses, the average house is $1.3 million. So we keep putting out these vision statements about how we want to have an inclusive community for all incomes and all families and all, and we're moving in the opposite direction. And so I'm having a hard time figuring out how you're going to write that chapter without thinking through sort of the range of options that we have with regard to zoning and land use. And they're out there. On one side is do nothing, On the other side, we could take the Houston model and just eliminate all zoning in the city. So and within that, there's a whole bunch of other things that we could be doing. There's tax relief for preserving older houses. There's more flexible zoning. There's cottage housing. There's a whole range of things that we need to figure out how to scope those chapters. And we are so, in my mind, we haven't had that discussion yet. And for you guys, it's unfair to you guys to ask you to start putting pen to paper without doing the prep work. So that's a long way of saying, I think while you're finishing up that chapter, it might not be a bad idea, and my recommendation here is to allocate a nominal amount of funding to do some kind of comparative review of successful and community-supported zoning and land use recommendations to achieve that vision, to allow more diverse housing, to strengthen housing opportunities. And I don't know how you can do that. Maybe you have the resources to do that comparative study in-house. Maybe you could turn to Virginia Tech, since they did they did a report to us. I think that was some graduate students. But just to look at different jurisdictions, what they've done, what they've had done successfully, what they've done with community support, what has blown up in their faces, like something like the Arlington example, and just sort of scope out what are the options that we want to move forward with in the vision chapter and the land use chapter. So that's a long way of saying I think we need some money, or we need some commitment of staff time to sort of scope this out in advance. And I'll turn it over to the other commissioners or to the staff or to whoever.
Thank you, Mr. Kravinsky. I agree. I think scoping and planning is important. Y'all do that as part of the comprehensive plan chapters, but it's more of a comparison of like what other chapters might include, not necessarily like what we want it to say, right? So that is a different thing, and it is a big discussion. I would say like that's kind of part of what we do as part of the updating of the comprehensive plan is to give that kind of direction, have the community conversation to decide what direction we want to go in. So, but maybe
And
there's a way to have
This is not necessarily to decide. This is to give us, do an analysis, some kind of study of examples that have worked in the past or not worked in the past, specifically things that haven't worked in the past,
Well,
We want to stay away from the word missing middle.
yeah,
That doesn't work.
there's tons of different strategies that different communities are trying today, and more, it seems, on the way every month or year. So, yeah, I don't know. An accounting of that would be helpful, just to have that context. Mr. Duncan?
In that same vein, so what have we learned from the AD's process in terms of every meeting that I've been to? You've been tasked, Jack, to go find out what they're doing in, Timbuktu about something. And I think they're good questions, and it's interesting what they're doing in Timbuktu, but is that a sustainable approach to sort of handle it ad hoc when, we're going to expand the cottage ordinance? I'm just inventing the world according to Phil, but we're going to expand the cottage ordinance. What's going on elsewhere on that? Should we preemptively know that, or do we sort of put it into the context of a concrete proposal that, you got to roll up your sleeves and answer questions about, as you've had to do with ADs and T-zones too, to some extent? Just in terms of the workload, how much time are you spending on the phone with people in Seattle or wherever? I don't know the answer to it. It seems to me like every meeting I go to answers the question that was raised at the previous meeting, so it's what you're doing is working, but I just don't know whether it's, sustainable to plan that as our approach.
Well, I think with the comp plan updates, there's a team, so there's a lot more delegation of tasks, so someone can maybe have someone with more bandwidth can do certain things. So I think with these updates that we're talking about, it's going to take a tremendous amount of teamwork and collaboration. So fortunately, I'm not sure that would be as big of a lift. And it's certainly something you do, I would think, more at the outright to understand you know, what folks are doing elsewhere to learn some strategies and see how that might fit locally. Of course, what someone's doing in Seattle or Timbuktu is not always going to be right locally. But it, you know, it is a good start, certainly, to understand how folks are tackling the same challenges that we're experiencing here elsewhere, but the solution might not always be the same. But a lot of that work does happen early on to first assess how that might work here.
And my guess is there's an awful lot of work already done. So it's mostly probably a literature review as opposed to new academic study, you know.
Anyway, I mean, that would be, you know, when we get into the next chapter, especially the vision, we would be looking at, you know, kind of the best practices that are out there and other examples. And so that's going to be something that we're going to kind of do already. But I understand what you're saying, and that, you know, and it can be more of a focus. And so I think it can be a higher level focus as we go into it. Because the vision, and then which informs the land use, those are the big ones, those, as we've talked about tonight. I mean, the land use chapter informs everything, and we've talked about that. So, you know, that's the land use map that informs the zoning map, and so that's the core stuff. And so that's exactly what we're talking about, the core stuff. And so, you know, I think your points are valid, and that's something that, you know, we're going to be doing that because it's kind of part of the course when we get into like a vision and a big lift like a land use chapter. And so, but I think we can scope that even at a little higher level. And like you said, the literature church, I think we're very unique here with our school system. And so I haven't read the article, but obviously Falls Church is a very desirable community to be in. And so we have a very high cost here, and we have a lot of, you know, things to be proud of. And I think that's, you know, the whole package is kind of our reality.
Yeah, and
yeah.
obviously market forces drive prices, right?
Yeah.
But there are things you can do to temper those market forces through tax code and you know, zoning code.
Other incentives, yeah, sure. All right. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Any other favorites in that future work area for any of these columns, any of the work areas? Green building standards for you, Mr. Stevens? I mean, it'd be great.
Yes.
Yes, please. That strikes me as kind of a zoning, environmental planning, and maybe long-range planning, like
Highly constrained.
yeah,
because
like a
of
pretty
state law,
collaborative.
but,
Yeah.
What could be updated there is when we do a special exception. Oh, sorry. What could be updated is when we do special exception, where we have an opportunity to negotiate for some, you know, higher standards, that we make sure we've got kind of the latest and best standards that could apply to our buildings. But that's as much as
Another area that's probably constantly evolving.
it is, yeah.
Mr. Duncan?
Carrie, in the transportation area, we spent a fair amount of time, you know, setting up a regulatory structure for e-scooters. And, you know, stuff happened and we didn't get there. I'd like to see us restart or encourage, or, I mean, in the whole area of the future in transportation, there's just a lot that we could benefit from if we could just get some reduction in the single occupancy vehicle, you know, whether it's scooters or golf carts. I'm okay with golf carts, you know. Why do we have to, you know, if we built a 250 unit affordable housing building at Virginia Village and issued everybody who lives there a scooter instead of paying zillions of dollars for a parking garage, that's sort of outside the normal bounds thinking that, you know, could offer some good potential for us. Scooters, bike, golf carts, you know, today's news, Waymo, you know, is trying to introduce driverless taxis. I mean, that would work here, you know, fairly manageable street grid, you know,
They're coming to DC. They just
Yeah,
announced
right,
it.
exactly, the article.
Yeah, in
I mean,
Phoenix,
we should be, seems to me like, we should always know what's going on in other jurisdictions, but we should not be afraid to
Never ridden in one.
get out in
So-
front and
so
say,
we're
we'd
riding
like to be
around.
the demonstration project
Driving
for
that car.
whatever. And I haven't even brought up vertical flight vehicles. That's my personal.
Yeah, so I think, that it is sort of, in the queue, and I know it was in the Community Energy Action Plan as well, and then on the slides that went with the council priorities update, it was in those with a July start. And I think, Kurt was gonna take the lead on sort of updating, looking at the work that was done in 2019 and sort of updating that, and then also looking at the golf carts. And yeah, I mean, I think last time, it was basically too many fees, not enough devices, and then, the city wanted 3 operators, and the operators felt that they could only make it work if it was just 1 operator.
Proprietary.
Yeah, so I do think it, is likely to kind of happen.
Yeah, I'm sure you learn things from that process, but, let's keep that on a front burner, a frontish burner, so that we can, be a leader in some transportation innovations that would help address the concerns that some people have, that there's just tons of traffic, which actually the data show there isn't, but, people still perceive that, and perception becomes a reality to some degree.
All right. I mean, recognizing that there's already a lot of stuff in this table and that we saw on the slides previously, is there anything sort of on your all's wish list that's not reflected up here? Recognizing also that we're 3 months into a 12-month calendar year. No must-do things. Any future wish list items?
I mean, I saw earlier on our, I forget which sheet it was, but the West End small area plan with West Falls Church now going in, and Founder's Row 1 and 2 being mostly done. It feels like a really good time to revisit that, especially with.
And Gordon Road, too.
Especially with the Gordon Road changes and the buyer property changes, the ownership changes of the buyer auto groups. It just feels like that could be so much better. It just feels like a good opportunity to revisit what we want to do there.
Good one.
TAP report on that?
I think it's, Emily said that they're still working on delivering that.
Drafts and they're working to finalize it, but we have a draft we're working in, so probably next 30 days, something like that.
Next week?
It'll be delivered this spring.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we've received the draft, but we're working on reviewing and finalizing with ULI. But once it's published, we'll make sure it gets to the Planning Commission. We'll set up a webpage too, so the materials like the presentation, the video from the actual event will be linked there in addition to the final report.
So as soon as it's in final form, but we've seen a draft of it, so we're commenting on it.
That could be like the demonstration project for all these things we're talking about, transportation, golf carts, cottage housing, whatever. I mean, that could be our experimental test bed.
Our lab.
Throw it up, see what sticks on the wall. Our lab, yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's got some of the advantages that the West Falls project had, which is the only people that live near it in Fairfax County. And so people are, those of us on the west. Yeah, didn't say that.
Even though in our elections,
Even
that's a
though I'm
big
done running
plus.
for office, I would never suggest that. But, those of us on the west
Funny how
end
that
have an active interest in
happened
it,
over there.
but still, it is sort of a blank slate that we could draft some cool things onto. My pitch, wherever it comes up, is that when you do the tree canopy work, whatever you're doing on it, that we have a subset of activity that assesses tree health. My observation in my backyard and those of others who've had trees fall in their house is that a lot of trees were planted here about 75 years ago, and they've reached the end of their useful life. And nobody really keeps track of that until the tree falls through their living room. And it's a safety thing, and it's trees don't go on forever. And I would like to see us focus some of our urban forestry efforts on making sure that the ones that we have are in good health, and the ones that aren't in good health get taken down in an orderly manner.
And are replaced ideally. Yeah, you can plan for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I that's actually a really interesting point. When we do these kind of overall studies of the city, of the tree canopy, how does that get documented digitally, like in the GIS? Like, how are we updating those layers so that our digital twin is kind of living with us rather than stagnant, and then we're 20 years and we're like, oh my God, we have to update that. So is that something that the intern who's working on some of these other things?
No,
Because you
that-
mentioned the GIS
yeah.
or something
Sure.
around that. So I was curious if during these kinds of opportunities, we also have the opportunity to have somebody do that sweep to that
Yeah.
digital
I mean, we have a
tracking.
GIS coordinator that's full-time on staff, and so, the layer's very old on that, because we did kind of look at recently. It's not gonna be kind of useful for any particular analysis of what we're looking at now, because of just what you said. And so, anyway, she does have, capabilities, but we have many other priorities.
I know.
And so, and the council has said in their initial comments on it that they didn't, we had one work session. They're not looking at citywide stuff now. They're just focused on the commercial and mixed-use projects, and they, applying a 10% tree canopy factor that the state is now allowing for the first time and through the zoning code. So the focus is very narrow, and so they may look at the broad later, and we would need that data then, yes, and we don't have it, so. Yeah. It's very old, yeah. I don't remember the year, but.
Canopy is allowed to be 10 now?
10% canopy requirement for commercial sites. It's 20% for residential, but the state just changed the law the last year, and so they're looking at that application, so we're doing some analysis now on that as part of one of these work plan items, the tree canopy, and we're collaborating on that, and we're doing a lot of it. We're looking at the last 6 commercial site plans and SEs, and we're looking at, so we have several of the team members looking at that as part of the collaboration, so, yep.
All right. Well, I think one of the deliverables out of this meeting is that sort of like a list of our priorities that we can communicate to council when we present the annual report. So what do we want to have on that list? I'm hearing enthusiasm for the land use chapter updates and vision chapter. Okay, so that's a priority. Cottages? Is that something that would maybe follow land use?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see sort of how ADUs fill in some of the gaps that the cottages had, see if they fill in some of
Okay.
the gaps on cottages. That is less of a priority for me than some of the like overall land use, like what's the more holistic things. I don't think it's a terrible idea, but it's lower down on the list for me until we see what happens with some of the other stuff in
Ladies.
motion.
I'm kind of in agreement that it needs to be kind of after the vision and land use chapter to kind of see how the city wants to move forward, right? And what is the vision of that? But also like, then the chapter 3, which is the appearance and the character and all of that, that kind of feeds into it. So I feel like that would come kind of second or third, right? Like you've got the vision and the land use chapters. And then I feel like the cottages and the appearance and character is kind of, they're tied in my mind in tandem, right? In terms of those kind of need to go together. I think, go
Go-
ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm not sure you have to necessarily do it sequentially. I think you can begin exploring updates to the cottage, ordinance while you're looking at the bigger picture. Just the same way as we did ADs, we did not have that didn't fall into a vision. So I'm not sure, I hear, it's a good point that, we should have this big picture, but at the same time, I'm not sure we necessarily have to do it sequentially.
Mr. Stevens, any thoughts from you on?
I kind of viewed it as a staff capacity issue, as to, for the timing of it, so.
Meaning, you thought staff would have the capacity to do it?
Well, no, I
or-
mean, they would have to determine if they have the capacity before it could be picked back up again. At least that's kind of the way I envisioned it, but,
I do agree that having, some of the conversation around the land use chapter and the vision would help inform the approach that we would ultimately take. I personally agree with you that those 4 recommendations that staff surfaced a few years ago seem reasonable, worthy of discussion, but reasonable. But maybe we wouldn't want to move forward on that as a community, expanding the area, introducing it in R1B, removing the 55 plus, maybe we wouldn't want to act on those until we've had those discussions around land use.
yeah.
I guess I just would, I think land use is probably all we really need, and then I hear you on community character, but just knowing how long these take, I think, yeah. So I would be in favor maybe of prioritizing things that way. The land use and vision chapters are going to be a huge effort and a big area of focus, I think, for staff.
I think I agree with you. I would like to see some discussion of the cottages folded into the character and appearance and all that, so that, people could get a clearer idea of the options that are out there for character and appearance that they might not have thought about, or that they might initially have been opposed to until they saw railroad. A lot of people still don't know railroad cottages exist.
And they're really tucked away.
Yeah, because they are so tucked away, and just bringing that to people's, it's been, 5 years more than that. And so it's timely to discuss it again in the context of all the other land use character discussions that we'll have.
And then I heard a suggestion from Mr. Polinsky for the West End Small Area Plan. Does
yeah.
everybody have enthusiasm for that as well? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's 4 potentially. My list I jotted down was the land use chapter and vision chapter sort of together concurrently. In some short order after that, cottages and the character and appearance chapter.
And I'd like to just bring up again the need for
Scoping.
a scoping study. I think, and I think
For
it
land
can be
use.
done concurrent with the Chapter 8, writing of the Chapter 8. While we're writing prep work, a comparative review of other successful options.
Yeah.
I'd put in a plug for the transportation things that we talked about too, maybe in the context of the
What were
West End
those?
discussion, e-scooters,
Those are on the current
yeah.
work, those are in the
but
June to
if-
December, so I'm,
If we're talking about what we're telling
oh,
council,
what we're prioritizing?
we're really interested in, I'd be really interested in that.
So we have this column down the bottom, which is the future work programs and resource dependent. And so, these are queuing up, but they're not, actively in our work program for this year. So these are all, something that you could look at for prioritization. So we're talking about, the land use chapter and the vision community character chapter. So that's, where we're talking about the appropriate things, and then there may be additional things that come out of your discussion that we can add to this and then inform council, and then we'll sort those out, so.
And not to short shrift the kind of ongoing housekeeping cleaning, but zoning code updates, the fixes for daycare and veterinarians in B2. I mean, I think that's something that there's a market interest in. I was talking to somebody yesterday who runs a gymnastics business and is really looking for ground floor retail space to run her very thriving business in a bigger location. I said, okay, well, those are the kind of people that we'd like to get their attention by updating our code to make their process less onerous.
Basically, this Newmark study, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a practical application of, an actual business that is interested in expanding or looking for a building in which normally we would not allow that use without
What's the use? I'm sorry?
gymnastics / daycare / parental hangout spot.
All together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We attended a EDA meeting where this came up as I thought, a kind of a high priority for them, and they
Yeah.
look to us and say, okay, Planning Commission, make it happen.
Yeah,
That's a popular, like, after-school kind of program. Like, there's, like, karate places. They send the bus, they pick the kids up.
Right.
They go do karate.
That
they
we
do
have
daycare.
in B too. In the shop, right? Like in the shopping center, there's that very popular karate or taekwondo.
I don't know if they offer, like, childcare as
I
part
think
of
they
it,
do. I think
though.
there are buses driving around.
Yeah, Junior does it.
Junri does?
That one,
Okay.
Yeah, is that B two? I forget.
Anyway, whatever. So if we wanted to put it in the ground floor of the building at, let's just say, Maple and Annandale, what would need to happen? Would they?
No,
have
I think we
this?
should, I mean, that's worthy of debate. I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but certain like sort of recreational, like what I'll call it commercial recreational uses that oftentimes locate in like flex space or warehouse space
Yeah.
aren't always the best thing in a central business district because of, I don't know, I mean, the nature of, like, I don't know, I just remember like the scramble thing when we got with that opened up, and there was, at the time, I wasn't a huge fan of that. I mean, I guess it's done okay. Just in the sense of like, in that case, it was purpose built, and so that oftentimes again has like a warehouse-like appearance. I guess if it's going into existing space that's vacant, there's not enough demand for the retail. But again, that's not really, oftentimes those businesses aren't like, open. I don't know, if you want to have a more lively downtown.
It's a good discussion to have because.
Yeah, it's worth, yeah, I'm just saying, if there's
you know,
one
anything-
particular, there's one particular person, and that's not a reason to change our whole code for one particular business that wants to be here, unless there's like so much groundswell support that, but I think we need to look at bigger picture trends.
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of that. If we can come up with any other bright ideas about what goes into ground floor space. I think we've used up grocery stores. We've got BJ's, we got a big box retail. I mean, this study that,
Yeah, I was gonna say, we
Tim
got
is waving is,
the research.
basically my impression of it is everything that's recommended is something we've already got.
Yeah.
We've got dog grooming, we've got whatever. And so what don't we have or what don't we have enough of?
Right. It's all about stuff that you can't do online, stuff you have to go in person to do.
Yes,
That-
exactly.
that's
Experiential.
as well.
Precisely
That's
right.
right.
And you've got parents who are hanging out waiting for Junior to get finished with gymnastics, dropping $8 for a cup of coffee,
It just depends, because also those businesses need a lot of room. I guess what I was trying to say, I didn't kind
Yeah.
of finish my thought,
Yeah.
that they need a lot of space. And oftentimes the rents in a central business district
Are
are
difficult.
too high
Yeah, that's
for
right.
somebody who needs large square footage. So that's where
Yeah.
they locate in warehouse buildings and flex buildings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's where like a gymnastics studio, and they need high ceilings. It
Yeah.
doesn't always lend itself to that. I mean, if there was some niche like type of business that could fit in like a traditional retail footprint, then I guess, sure, why not? But yeah, it's just something to consider. It may not actually, again, maybe this is a particular, like, again, they have like,
As Becky always reminds us, there's not as much money, of course, in uses like that on the net fiscal impact model. But,
Right.
the uses that do generate lots of money, like restaurants, we may not be tapped out, but we got to be getting pretty close.
But our code was set up for retail that existed 20 years ago. So.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And it's not
Uses are
responsive.
evolving. All right, any other things that we want to communicate? I know we're closing in on it's 9:15. Any other things that we want to communicate to council in that annual report, apart from like a lot of enthusiasm for this very robust work plan and some of the very concrete projects? I mean, I know we recommended Vision Zero and complete streets and green building standards and the residential parking requirement. Like, those were, I think, things that we had asked y'all to look at last year, and here we are, exploring these. So thank you for that. Anything else that we want to communicate? I mean, so the short list that I have, things that we would prioritize, after all of these things that you already have identified for work this year, are those comprehensive plan chapter updates, land use and vision, character, West End small area plan, cottages, and then the B2 commercial uses and e-bike and scooters. I heard that from Mr. Duncan.
Ground floor.
What do you mean by transportation? Do you mean the e-bike and scooters and?
Innovative, alternative transportation.
Okay. What are we gonna do about Waymo when it arrives? Okay.
It's great. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, our friend, my colleague has written in one too. We were just had a big
Phoenix, it
big
works
chat
very
about
well.
it at work
Runs
today.
Until it runs and
Yeah.
puts you on the railroad tracks or something.
No, it's actually.
Maybe we don't need to do anything about Waymo. I mean,
It does slow
yeah.
way down, and it'll do an extra loop if it misses its turn, it'll.
I hear it's like the safest driver. It goes exactly the speed limit, doesn't run any yellow lights.
It's the way I drive when I'm in the district, don't know where I'm going.
It stops for pedestrians and bikers and.
Oh, yeah.
It does, it sees
Very
dogs
polite.
on leashes, like on the sidewalk, it scans all the way to the buildings. You can see everything that it's seeing.
That's crazy. Yeah, I want to ride in one. It'll be fun. Okay, all right.
Until it kidnaps you and drives you off somewhere. You hit a button and get out.
take
It's
it.
an
I-
emergency
I-
exit button.
Also, the proposal that
Presentation.
Yeah, I mean,
Just let it drive.
unfortunately, I'm going to be gone. Well, so what's the procedure for this? I think we need to vote on the annual report, but we don't have an April 2nd meeting. I'm gone on the 14th, so y'all can vote without me, and then I can deliver it at
In May, what was the date?
May. Is that right?
28th, April 28th.
April 28th, yeah, I think we agreed. I have that on my calendar. So, but y'all will have to vote on sort of what these recommendations. Mr. Trainer, are you going to update the
Yes.
plan? Do you want an email from me with this, or did you sort of jot down?
Sure,
the-
that's always welcome, but we took notes as well.
Okay.
But we
And there-
vote on
and it's
the-
recorded.
You'll
We vote on the report.
Report.
Yeah,
correct.
they'll be
But
incorporated.
Your remarks can,
But the last page of the report includes
Oh, well,
these
yes.
Right.
priorities, so I'm just
Right.
gonna,
I think we had held off on approving the final
because we didn't
report
have
until we'd
those
had this
sort of
meeting.
priorities.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that,
okay.
okay, so that sounds like good next steps.
Don't forget about the part in the letter where we recommend a 20% pay increase for all the planning staff.
Oh, wait, speaking of that,
Oh, did you get
the
some
planning
news?
commission stipend,
And the planning,
Increase.
the Krasner stipend.
Wyatt's
for-
gone like he's ghosting me now.
I,
He was like all gung ho. He's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And budget season came and he ghosted me
And
totally.
dinner from Ellie Bird at the
yeah,
next event.
How
okay.
long have we been set at $100 since 1978? I mean,
Yeah.
what's going on here? It used to be a lot.
I talked to Wyatt today on that, and, yes.
Breaking
and-
news?
And so in terms of, he was looking into it, and so he would like us, and what I'll do is draft something up and share it with the chair and the commission, requesting that of the council directly. So, he looked into it, but feels like, planning commission needs to ask the mayor
We
and
gotta ask for a
council.
raise.
And so,
I move we request the raise.
and then
Second.
we, yeah.
Call the question.
So anyway, but
It's killing us here.
he was very supportive of it, but at this point, he thinks the correct roadway for that, and so I agreed to draft something up on your behalf,
Okay.
and then
Thank
we'll
you.
share that, and we'll have a formal request.
Terrific,
All right?
thank you very much.
So that's
Mr.
breaking
Fuller.
news.
I'm not counting my chickens here, but at least we can have a healthy debate about. I just want to know how long it's been at $100. No one's been able to answer that.
And then Phil should start getting his money, all the personnel action forms that were filed weeks ago now. So, yeah, but anyway, because he was on council, he wasn't eligible to receive the stipend for a year. Now he's eligible this year, so we've processed that. Check your next check. So anyway, but everybody's been updated, the new members, the old members are off, so all the paperwork got done the last 3 weeks, so.
Great.
If I get $100 extra, everybody on the staff and Jean, we're all gonna go out to lunch together.
All right.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think, is that a wrap on this item, Mr. Fuller? And
Yes, we have the list, and we'll constitute that in the annual report in a paragraph and share it with you and the whole commission for vote.
thanks to all of you for all the hard work that you do on
Sure.
behalf of the city.
Well, thanks for allowing us to share the details of all the work we do
Yeah, it
and
was-
and for you to meet the staff. And
Yeah.
we have a great staff here, and I appreciate the opportunity as well.
Yeah, you know, you
Yeah.
really do. I think the rest of this informational items is just,
It was just materials that you had asked
Nothing-
for, and then it was some background pieces that inform, the work plan. And so we just were sharing them with you as well as the ones you requested.
Okay, and as
specifically.
far as the sign ordinance, that we had that letter, thank you, Mr. Gresco, for referring that to us. So is that something that would land on your plate, Jack? The sort of sign ordinance update, potentially?
That's something that's on our cleanups list.
It's on the cleanup list now, okay.
So if that, in terms of, we'd still need, I think, direction to address that specifically, so.
In concert with maybe with Akita and the side of things.
Yeah.
with that. Yeah, there's a lot involved in updating the sign code, but it's a long time coming.
Yeah.
Even when I was on the BZA years ago, we got a number of sign ordinances.
So do-
Yeah.
Do
the
we want to
council
add that as an additional item for our sort of list for council?
We can do that.
If that's gonna be a-
Memo was, or the annual report they sent to the council too, so.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We could,
And you got a copy of it tonight as well, so, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but as far as the priorities, I mean, if that's going to be something that we're going to be spending some significant time on later this year, assuming you have the time for that, Mr. Trainer, then,
Well, yeah, we're not sure
Part of the
exactly
zoning
what the
code
staff,
cleanups.
that would be assigned to that, so, but it's on our work program. It may
Yeah.
be a team effort,
Okay.
probably, is what I expect, so.
To do it right, it can be an undertaking because you want to look at what we have, look at best practices and signage. Signage is as much an art as it is zoning. I mean, to do it right and to have the code work. But first step would be to look at all the variances we're getting and why. Sizes or, I know, for example, our two-story retail buildings came in to get variances in order to put signage up on the levels and things of that nature. But there's a fine line because you want signage to work, not be cluttered.
yeah. This also seems like a task where the community appearance chapter, an updated version of the community appearance chapter might be helpful.
We want to help businesses out, but at the same token, we want it to look good. And, easily, signage goes overboard.
Mhm.
There's a law that says vape stores have to have,
They have to have the big wavy guys. Those are,
You gotta restrict
those
those
are
stores.
required.
That's another thing, that's like, getting the zoning and things, you gotta restrict where those, where they can locate. You can't always ban them outright, but restricting where they can go.
There are a lot of
We
them.
discourage them in some of our zones, or it can be something to consider. Payday loan places, title loan places, I mean, there are things you can do to try to, discourage those uses from locating where you don't want them.
All right, great. Well,
You can adjourn the meeting.
yeah, I think we're done.
You want to do the look ahead real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, for April 2nd, we've canceled that meeting. We didn't have any agenda items. And then on the 16th, we have the potential for grocer, is that as of today? So-
Yeah, that'll be
Yeah,
work
okay,
session.
because I was seeing a new schedule today. Okay, so we'll have a work session on that. That's the grocer at West Falls. They ended up not hitting the maximum square footage that was required under the VC. And so they're a little short, and so, it'll be another type of commercial use in there proposed. And so they're asking through an SE process to modify that VC. So that'll be coming to you. And then the Economise site plan, they got their materials back in a timely manner, so we're setting that up for a final vote on the 16th. So,
I'll be traveling for this meeting, so Mr. Stevens will.
all right, great.
I may have to miss that. Is that the week of school, right?
Yeah. Is anybody else missing that meeting?
Yeah,
I'm not gonna be here.
Yeah, okay.
Yes? No?
I'll be there.
Maybe?
I'll be there.
You won't?
4.
You're a no?
Wait a minute.
4. You will be here? I'll be here. Okay, so Mr. Polinsky is a yes, Mr. Duncan is a yes. Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
And so it rests on, if we can have the meeting, really rests on, are you traveling? Like, it's like a person, oh, okay. Well, I don't want you,
I want to physically be here on the 16th, so I'm gonna
and we need to have 4 in person.
physically assembled.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll could be remote, but we need 4 warm bodies here.
Yep.
I'm going on spring break, if that's the break.
Yeah, it's spring break, yeah.
You can count one.
We can count remote as.
One, though. Just one, or all?
No.
Not,
Mostly,
no,
but like, I don't know, something in the charter, Paul Snyder Reese.
So we'll have to check.
I don't think the world will stop orbiting around, the sun, but all we're supposed to meet every month, but I don't know what happens.
could we kick it to the following Wednesday? I mean,
21st?
just reschedule the meeting date. Is that the 21st or is that the council?
Yeah.
23rd, yeah, you're right.
23rd. You're gone? I can do the 23rd, I believe. I mean, it sounds like that 16th meeting is pretty iffy for the group.
Why don't you wait and see, and if you can't, reschedule it for the 23rd.
Okay. Do you
I
want
guess
to check in
the
closer to?
applicants, we got some time, but we need to notify them in advance if we're going to move that date.
Sounds like we're not gonna have a quorum,
I mean, we're not going to have quorum, we're not going to have quorum. They need to know sooner or later.
3, it sounds like we don't have a quorum. So.
Yeah, I guess the only thing we'll look into, I mean, we'll assume we don't have a quorum and we have to move the 16th or wait till the 7th.
But we have to have a meeting in April.
Yeah, I mean, there is something that we're supposed to meet, but I don't know, if we don't,
There's no penalty.
I don't think, it's the end of the world. So,
Don't tell Paul Snyder. Don't tell Paul.
We're going on strike in a week.
is there anybody that could be virtual to be the 4th?
I think we have to have 4 in person.
Well,
You need 4 here.
4 here,
And then-
we were going to double check that, but I was just wondering,
Yeah, we need 4 physically.
4, okay, 4 physically
Yeah, have a
here.
quorum for.
That's what they're saying. We'll check.
Pretty sure state code is for a moment.
All right, so,
Glad we did this. So maybe we just keep in touch. We can check in on the, I mean, you all have to advertise too. Are either of these public hearings? Or? are
Both
they
work sessions.
Work sessions, so no
They're-
advertising.
yeah,
Oh, wait, actually, Econizes.
The Econize is,
Site plan.
A site plan, okay.
yeah, they were looking for final. Yeah,
I don't
on
want to
that.
hold them up. I mean, with their,
Well, if we don't have a quorum, we can't
Yeah.
vote on them.
I'm just wondering if we can move to the 23rd. People would be amenable to that. I don't know if that works for staff, but just,
I could do
because then we still have a week in between, because the 30th is a Wednesday. So we'd still have 2 weeks. The 23rd is a yes for you, Mr. Kravinsky. What about you, Mr. Stevens?
yes.
Yeah? Yes? Mr. Duncan? You could do that? Oh,
Okay,
I thought you said you couldn't. You could.
so we're just.
23rd.
23rd.
23rd?
See what room's available.
You can't, you're the no on the 23rd. Mr. Polinsky?
Okay,
Yes? Okay.
okay,
Okay, so we'd have a 6 for the 23rd.
okay.
So that could be a good alternative. if we
Okay,
wanna
so
keep
we'll look for a room and we'll set up a schedule for the 23rd, and we'll, indicate no quorum, and we'll contact the applicant accordingly, so,
things-
yeah.
Okay, sorry, we're all going
yeah,
away for spring break.
it happens. It is spring break, yep. Okay. Then on May 7th, we have the Broadway, Washington, there was an easement that's being vacated, and that's just, a procedural thing that we need to do. And then the affordable living policy, they're back on schedule, so that would be the first work session where they're checking back in with this. Are we still, based on their schedule, Emily, is that, yeah? Oh, that's me.
Yes, I believe they're still on for May 7th.
So we just got a new schedule from them this week, and so since we published this last week. But anyway, we will update that. So anyway, the affordable living policy is coming back to, they're back on schedule, so.
Great.
All right, that's it on the updates. I'm glad we were able to figure out the dates here and the lack of quorum on the 16th, so we'll set up the alternative. Great, okay.
All right, well,
All set.
terrific.
All done?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you all for your
All right.
time. Do you not have one?
There you go.
Very good.